Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if the USJ attack took more of a toll on Aizawa? Special shout out to the original creator, Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Isuku was feeling anxious. His first week in high school had been far more chaotic and nerve-wracking than he ever could have imagined. First, his teacher had threatened him with expulsion on the first day, then Kaken had nearly killed him during the battle trial, and then a few days ago his whole class had been attacked by villains. Real villains. Not to mention the other countless moments which had turned his life upside down lately. Like the fact that he had actual friends now, or that he talked with a girl on a daily basis. His mother had been so proud. And All Might had given him his quirk. The best and most awesome quirk there was. Honestly, he often asked himself what he had done to deserve all this luck. All Might had told him that he earned his new power through his own effort, but still, was he really worthy? He shook his head. Enough of those gloomy thoughts. Even if he was not worthy now, he would give his best and slowly over time prove to his mother and his friends that he deserved to be a hero. Isuku would save everyone he could with a smile on his lips, just like his mentor. "I am here," he whispered to himself and grinned. The smile on his face froze when he looked at his watch and realized that he would need to hurry if he wanted to be punctual for the start of class. Aizawa didn't tolerate tardiness in the slightest, and he had no desire to be expelled in his second week here at UA High School. "Thank you very much." Isuku sprinted through the mostly empty school corridors, which would probably displease Ida, and hastily ripped open the monstrous door to his classroom. His eyes scanned the room for his teacher's signature sleeping bag. He isn't here yet, he breathed out relieved. "Midoriya, are you alright?" asked Ida. Many others followed suit, most notably Uraraka, who even hugged him. A girl had voluntarily hugged him. What should he do? What should he? Mina snickered as she saw his completely flushed face. Eventually he relaxed into the hug, although he was not brave enough to reciprocate it. It was nice to have friends who cared about his well-being. His blissful mood was shattered by the sound of someone clearing their throat behind him. Instinctively he turned around and looked up only to find nothing. Slowly his gaze traveled lower until came face to face with a person even smaller than himself. That was not something that happened often, considering he was already rather diminutive, but the little, blonde girl in front of him was half a head shorter than him. "Would you all please move out of the way and get to your seats? Class is about to begin." Nervously he scurried over to his desk and sat down along with the rest of his classmates. Well, all except for one. "What the fuck is a little girl doing here? Has one of those stupid teachers lost their kid or what?" sneered Bakugu. "No, Mr. Bakugu. This is not the case, and I would advise you to show more respect to your superiors in the future. Now sit." As she spoke the last part, a silvery shimmer appeared to envelop the boy before he was slammed down into his seat. Izuku perked up. He knew that twinkling energy field. The blonde girl was a pro-hero. She was. "Greetings, Class 8-1. I am Tanya von de Gurchaff, also known under the hero alias Argent. The 11th goddess," he loudly proclaimed. Too loud maybe, as the hero in question shot him an annoyed look, but he was so excited that he just couldn't control himself. Even though she was not in his top 5 hero list, she had quickly earned her place as the number 7 in his heart after her flawless debut and comet-like ascend up the rating board. There wasn't much public information about her personal life as she was very secretive in her interviews, but he knew that she was barely 20 years old. Despite her young age that should have allowed her next to null practical experience, she was one of the most effective heroes on the field. Of course, her monthly capture rates paled in comparison to All Might or even Endeavor, but she had a near 100% success rate. An incredible feat that was an unachievable dream for most professionals in the industry. Furthermore, in contrast to Endeavor or other high-capacity heroes with powerful quirks, she could claim to possess a very low property damage and injury register. All her missions were executed flawlessly and with the utmost professionalism and speed. A model hero in Izuku's opinion. This impressive work ethic awarded her the spot of place 11 on the national leaderboards merely 1 year after her debut in Tokyo. A record that even eclipsed that of Hawks, who had achieved the spot of number 3 after 2 years of hard work. Only 2 months ago, an anonymous user on social media had posted a picture which showed Degurchaf carrying multiple injured civilians out of a burning building on her silver barriers. The backdrop of the low evening sun had given her the illusion of a halo, while the eponymous Argent shields had appeared like shining wings. Izuku had immediately saved the picture in his folder coolest hero pics of all time, because it was so epic. Another user had jokingly commented, "Looks like a goddess descending from the heavens. Our number 11 is awesome, love." Since then, the term 11th goddess had become an affectionate nickname in the online community for the cute and devastatingly powerful heroine. "I knew it," he heard Uraraka say. That she was interested in Ms. Degurchaf came as no surprise to Izuku. She was a rescue hero enthusiast of similar caliber to him after all. Now that he thought about it, the Gravity Quirk user could probably learn much from Argent. "You are most likely asking yourself what I am doing here right now instead of your homeroom teacher Mr. Aizawa. The answer is that I will take over his lessons as well as Mr. All Might's lessons in foundational heroics for the foreseeable future. Both of them have been wounded to various degrees and need to take care of other business at the moment, so the Hero Commission has assigned me as a temporary replacement." "I am saved," cried my Netta. He probably believed that without Eraserhead present he would be unlikelier to be expelled. "I do not know how Mr. Aizawa has handled your education so far, but let me assure you that I take my new position very seriously. I will not tolerate misbehavior or disobedience of any kind. When I ask you a question, I expect it to be answered immediately. Furthermore, you may only address me as Degurchaf, or if German is too difficult to pronounce for use, Argent. Is that understood?" "Yes, Ms. Argent," mumbled half the class. Most sounded so unsure that it seemed more like a question. "I asked if I was understood," she said more forcefully this time, her eyes blazing blue. "Yes, Ms. Argent," shouted everyone more energetically. "We will need to work on that." Izuku let out a small sigh of relief when the cerulean light in her eyes dimmed. The small woman had for a moment appeared even scarier than Aizawa. How was that possible? "Now, before we begin, do you have any questions for me?" Izuku slowly raised his hand while looking around to make sure he did inconvenience anybody else who wanted to ask her something. His other hand wandered to his notebook to immediately jot down her answers. "Yes, Midoriya? Would you rather call yourself a rescue-focused hero or a combat-focused hero? I meant questions of administrative nature, but I guess I was unclear on that. What a shame. He would have loved to interview her more about her quirk. It was so interesting. I would call myself neither, for I see both these aspects as intrinsic to my job as a pro-hero. You cannot save somebody without neutralizing potentially harmful elements first, and you cannot fight someone without saving the mission objective, or else you will have failed. I do what I can wherever I am available to the best of my abilities, as should every pro-hero with a versatile skill set. Does that answer your question?" He nodded. "So manly," whispered Kirishima somewhere in the background. "What an interesting person." Izuku idly wondered how someone so young could already possess so much maturity and experience. How could Argent have grown up to become the way she was today? ##. Nedu was intrigued. That did not happen often when he possessed such startling intelligence that he could predict entire conversations before somebody even opened their mouth. Tanya von Degurchaf, however, was a mystery with many confusing solutions. The Hero Commission had obviously tried to gain a foothold in his school by sending one of their most loyal agents here. Their sheer ruthlessness and determination to gain more influence over his domain was as astounding as it was pathetic. Normally, he would have suppressed such attempts with his far-reaching influence, but this time they had used the USJ incident to cry out for more safety measures, and everybody believed them. Like the wretched fools they were, supplied the part of his brain that still had not forgiven humanity for what they did to him. Although, if he was honest with himself, he was kind of glad that they succeeded with their ploy. For as much as the Hero Commission could learn about him through Tanya, he could learn as much about them as well. and maybe even gain insight into the mind of the Argent hero, or the mystery girl as he privately called her. Because Nedu had known the little blonde girl before the Hero Commission had sunk their claws into her. Before her immigrant parents had died under suspicious circumstances and she had been transferred to the public orphanage for a single night. Before all that, they had met only a single time, but he would never forget the look of cold apathy as she watched a man getting torn in half. He thought himself a good judge of character. Humans were predictable animals after all, and yet he was unsure if the tiredness he perceived from the small child back then had been real or just his imagination. It had been a weariness resulting not from a lack of sleep or rest which would have been normal for a child her age, but one of purely psychological origin. The kind of fatigue he saw sometimes when he looked in the mirror or the one many pro-heroes had late in their career. An expression only those were familiar with who had seen the world burn far too many times to cry anymore for the innocence that got swallowed up in its flames. When you had accepted deep down that there was no hope for things to ever truly change, because the cycles of history, big and small, would repeat themselves forever. That resigned hopelessness was not something a child should understand. But young Tanya had. And he couldn't figure out how. So now that I know what I will have to work with, I think it's time to inform you about what we are going to do in the next 2 weeks. Although everybody's head felt like it was about to explode from the mind-numbing amount of questions they had just weathered, Class 1A collectively perked up. Miss Degurchaf had bombarded them with inquiries about their workout routine, their diet plans, their Quirk training, their combat experience, and much more over the course of the last hour with a ferocity that had even exhausted Isuku. They all had to write their answers down as fast as she asked for them. Apparently that had been part of an exercise, but she wouldn't elaborate for what exact purpose. Afterwards, a silvery shimmer had surrounded each piece of paper and lifted them up through the air, collecting them on the teacher's desk. A sight that had Isuku frantically scrambling for his notebook. You might have survived against common street thugs and a few high-level villains, but in comparison to what you are about to face, you are totally underprepared. A match against those vastly weaker or stronger than you can teach only so much, but against those of similar skill. That is where you will need to truly push yourself and overcome your weaknesses. The whole class was hanging at Argent's lips. What would she say? What could be worse than actual villains? I am talking, of course, about the annual sports festival. Chaos broke out. Really? Oh man, I thought she was gonna say we have to fight All Might or something. Ridiculous. This can't be. Is she for real? Until suddenly Degurchaf's voice cut through the noise like butter. Silence. Most instantly quieted down and the rest lowered their voices to a whisper to finish their thoughts. There is no need to scream like monkeys. You are heroes in training. Act like it. Ida sheepishly looked down at his desk. If you have questions, raise your hand and ask. Like I said, the sports festival will be held in 2 weeks. But shouldn't the school postpone the event? Yeah, what if the villains attack again? Asked Kaminari. Many shivered at the mere thought. The principal made the decision and I am not here to question his orders. Regardless if you agree with Ned's judgment or not, you will have to attend if you do not wish for a 1-week-long detention with me. Her tone was so flat and her glare so icy that it instantly shut them up. Besides, the principal is probably the most intelligent being on this planet. I doubt he would carelessly expose you all to danger. Whatever his reasons are, they are most likely very good. Momo thoughtfully nodded at that. The lesson is almost over, but let me tell you this, I am going to assist with your training and offer advice where necessary, but you will be the ones that have to put in the effort. If you require upgraded support equipment, go to the support course. If you want to get stronger, go to the gym. I am not here to hold your hand. As future heroes, you are expected to take care of yourself. Do you understand? Yes, Ms. Argent. We will go over some training routines for you next time. Any more questions for today? Nobody dared to make a sound. Dismissed, she said with a wave of her hand right before the bell signaled the end of class. How she had timed that so perfectly was anyone's guess. Hashtag. Midoriya, a word please. Oh no. Was he in trouble? Had he said something wrong? Did she think that he had written too much information on his sheet? Was he too annoying? Would he get detention? Would he? Relax. Nothing of the sort is true. While that was a relief, his cheeks started coloring from embarrassment. He had been mumbling again. Yes, you are mumbling. A nervous tic that you should get under control sooner rather than later. I know that you are an intelligent kid judging from your 96% in the entrance exam. So giving away your potentially insightful thoughts to your enemies might backfire at the worst possible moment. Understood? Weiss, Miss Digurchaff. Good. What I want to talk with you about is why you are by far the most injured student in this institution only 1 week after school has started. I read your file and you have been treated by Recovery Girl 3 times already, not counting the one time after the USJ incident. Why is that? My quirk is tricky to control. I end up hurting myself if I use it. Is that an innate feature of your quirk? Do you need to get hurt to get stronger? And no, Ms. Digurchaff. It came in really late. I mean my quirk. I don't have much experience using it. So what you are saying is that with more practice you could reach a point where you do not cripple yourself accidentally? If she put it like that it sounded so brutal. Well, it kind of was actually. Yes, he whispered. Argent just nodded as if she had heard that story 1,000 times already. Good. That means you can improve. Do you go to quirk therapy or quirk counseling? No. You know that this school has trained professionals to do that job? Have you not been sent to UA's quirk counselor yet? They have a counselor? He asked in puzzlement. But Eraserhead, Mr. Aizawa knew about your condition? Yeah. I told him. Ms. Digurchaff groaned and muttered something unintelligible under her breath. Isuku could only make out. Finally she bit her teeth together and hissed out, and pray tell, what did he say in response to your problem? Mr. Aizawa told me that I need to figure out how to use my quirk without injuring myself. Really? That's it? Why yeah. He shrunk in on himself under the sheer, ice-cold fury of her glare. Argent was smoldering with fury. Objectively, Isuku knew that his teacher was a pro-hero who wouldn't hurt him, but that didn't change the fact that he suddenly felt very afraid for his physical well-being. Whatever he had messed up, he would surely be expelled for it now. Sorry, Ms. Digurchaff. It won't happen again, he pleaded while bowing as deep as he could. What? Midoriya stand up. Hesitantly he straightened his back, but could not bring himself to meet her gaze. Thankfully she did not force him to. He did not want her to see the tears beginning to form in his eyes. Why would you believe that you are at fault here? She asked softer this time. Am I not? Of course not. You should never apologize for being ignored or mistreated. Everybody deserves help, and those that deny them that are either monstrously incompetent or villains. Despite his shame, he could not stop himself from gawking at her in shock. Let us continue this conversation another time. A hallway is hardly fitting, no? Today after school, go to Hound Dog's office and tell him that I sent you there with a code BLUTZ35. He will know what that means. Understood? Why, my mom, she might worry. Then better text her now and maybe ask Hound Dog for a letter that explains your absence. Good. And tomorrow afternoon you are going to come to the teacher's lounge and wait for me there. Together we will test your abilities a bit before I hand you over to the specialists. Most likely this remedial quirk training will commence every second weekday for the next few months until this lapse in your education has been corrected and you are on a comparable level with your classmates. Can you do that, Midoriya, or do you have appointments that might come in the way? Shook his head quickly. No. I should be fine. I'll have to ask my mom, but I'm as sure she'll be okay with it. Then go, Midoriya. You don't want to be late for history class. Meanwhile, I will have to talk with the principal about this debacle. Isuku, filled with new panic, turned around and ran. The next day was filled with excitement for, depending on the individual, either the favorite or least liked lesson of the curriculum. Although Argent was a lot less popular than All Might, he was the symbol of peace after all. She was still the number 11 ranked hero. Welcome to Foundational Hero Studies. I already told you that you would need to train on your own for the sports festival, but that does not mean that I am going to let your education in similar fields suffer. From what I heard, All Might simulated a bomb threat scenario with varying success last week, But because he decided not to write anything of value down and the videotapes were deleted for privacy reasons, I am left with nothing. Oh no. Do we have to repeat that now? Asked Denki. He had no desire to repeat his less than stellar performance from last time and embarrass himself again. She fixed him with a glare. To answer your question, Kaminari, yes and no. This time you will be dealing with a hostage situation. I shall save the damsel in distress and be the shining knight this world desires, proclaimed Yuga, earning himself the confused stares of the whole class. Ignoring him, the diminutive hero continued. 2 of you will be the villains and 2 of you will be the heroes. So far so good, mumbled Isuku nervously. He too did not wish to re-experience the slightly traumatic events of the first exercise. Although compared to actual villains trying to kill his friends, Kaken trying to hurt him was nothing new. And one will be the hostage? Darn it. Tenya raised his hand and butted in. Ms. Argent, will we be randomly chosen again? And why are we playing the hostages? We are heroes in training, not civilians. Izuku couldn't contain himself. Wasn't it obvious? That is because we can't always predict what's going to happen to us. Even with our powers, we could be caught unaware and held hostage. For example, if a villain took your partner captive, then what do? It will happen to at least one of us at some point, and this exercise is designed to prepare us for that. We need to also know how to behave as hostages safely so that we don't endanger others when they are trying to rescue us. Very good, Midoriya. And no, you will not be randomly chosen. That would be counterproductive to a controlled test of your abilities. Didn't All Might say dash? Don't interrupt me again if you don't want detention. Absolute silence suffocated the classroom. The rules are as follows. The 2 villains will attempt to move from one end of the training area to the other with their captive. If they touch the yellow line on the eastern wall, they win. To do this, they may use any means necessary to a reasonable degree. Quirks are allowed, but please refrain from action that may seriously harm or debilitate your classmates. Is that understood? Yes, Ms. de Gurchaff, intoned the crowd of nervous students. The heroes naturally start on the opposite side of the field and will try to... Bakugu, are you listening? What do you think real pro-heroes should do in this kind of situation? With a look that practically screamed, "Are you shitting me?" he huffed. Stop the bastards, obviously. Incorrect. Does anyone care to explain why? Momo instantly held her hand up, which earned her a nod from Argent. The top priority of a hero should be to save the hostage and then apprehend the criminals. The whole mission would be a failure if the victim gets abducted or worse, killed. Completely right. You should always prioritize saving people over beating the villains as a general rule. Of course there are exceptions, but you will likely cover those next year. You have a question, Uraraka? Are the hostages allowed to fight back? How realistic is this going to be? An excellent question. Yes, they will be able to fight back, but not in the way you think. First, their hands are going to be tied together with capture tape behind their back, and you are not allowed to break it. Only the hero team or the villain team may unbind them if they so choose. Secondly, if the villains feel threatened enough by either the heroes or their prisoners, then they will be able to kill you. Shocked gasps rang out. Not really, of course. What are you thinking? If they can immobilize their target on the ground for longer than 5 seconds, then that counts as a kill. In that case, the heroes are going to automatically lose, but the villains also give up their leverage and will be mercilessly hunted down. If they cannot reach the border during the next minute, they will be announced as captured. That sounds kinda cool actually, whispered somebody. Dude, didn't you learn anything from the first day? You jinxed it. Fortunately, Argent seemed to ignore the remark and instead sent the student to the locker rooms to change into their costumes. ##. Many like to think that while Nedu was incredibly intelligent, he obviously couldn't know everything that happened in his school. That was true to a certain extent, but those people also forgot that he had access to some of the most advanced design and production facilities in the world, together with a sheer unending stream of fresh and innovative minds that could build him whatever gadgets he desired. It was funny, really, he mused, that a species which would have died out long ago if they had not embraced progress, so often forgot about what technology could do for them. Individual humans were weak. Although the age of quirks had somewhat remedied that fact, it still held true for the majority of the population. To bridge the gap and become more powerful, they could either join a collective and search for protection in a group, or they could use science to achieve the impossible. From experience, he could tell that only the second option worked reliably. Too bad then that technological progress has been brought to a near standstill with the rise of superhuman powers. The humans had romanticized their organic skills while forgetting that the most awe-inspiring thing, nature itself, left them with so many unused possibilities. Intellect and understanding reigned supreme, even against superstrength or speed. It always had and it always would. For those who knew how to play the strings of the universe were the ones in control over those that blindly followed them. It was the mind-over-body principle, and Nedu had proved it to be correct an uncountable number of times. Well, actually he could count them, but that was not the point. In its most basic application, that meant that even a small, powerless rodent like himself could kill All Might if he wanted. All it would take would be an untraceable amount of poison in his tea, or a direct bullet to the head, or a room full of fluor gas. It would be ridiculously easy really, and that terrified him. Not because he feared himself, that would be pathetic, but because anyone not blinded by the propaganda of the Hero Public Safety Commission and similar organizations could easily see through the great lie that quirks were the most powerful thing a person could possess. That it was what gave them value and identity. In reality, that could not be further from the truth. Did having hands give you an advantage over someone with no hands? Of course. But if that person lost their hands in an accident, then they were just as useless as the other one. And more importantly, what if the handless person learned to work with their feet? As silly as this metaphor was, it still applied to the world of quirks. Nedu didn't need a surveillance quirk, or one that let him look through walls or turn invisible. He had an army of robots and cameras and bugging devices tirelessly reporting everything of importance in his domain to the comfortable safety of his office. He had wandered off topic again, hadn't he? Nedu chuckled to himself. Sometimes hyperintelligence also had its downsides. Anyways, at the moment he was watching the live feed of Dagirchaf's first exercise with Class 1-8's tiny spider bots. Barely visible to the naked eye, were recording her body language and heat signature, while cleverly hidden cameras all over the campus were tracking her facial expressions down to the most minute twitch. Long-range directional microphones captured her every word, although that was not really necessary as his lip-reading software already automatically translated whatever she said. He could do that with every person who set foot on school grounds, and even most people in the world when he hacked himself into the traffic camera network. While not legal, he was careful to never leave a trace that would point these cyber attacks to him. Which also was redundant considering that nobody had ever noticed him breaking into the system at all. Perhaps he should send an anonymous tip to improve digital security to the government. Oh, he was getting sidetracked again. Silently he sipped at his lukewarm tea as he watched with rapt attention how Dagirchaf treated her students. She was efficient, professional, if not a bit too reserved sometimes. Her unwavering focus on her pupils brought him joy. To think that she would take her job so seriously and become so comfortable in her role already. The HPSC had sent her resume 4 days ago. It had included a provisional teaching license which he strongly suspected to be a fake pretext to infiltrate his school. When would the girl have had the same time to learn pedagogy after all? All the signs pointed to the reality that she had spent most of her short life getting stronger to quickly climb the public hero rankings. If his hunch was correct, then that meant the girl had been drilled on how to properly treat school children in only 3 days. Impressive. In such a short amount of time, she seemed to have integrated better than Toshinori did during his 3-month crash course. Was she a trapped genius like him? Had she been forced into the life of a marionette for the HPSC despite a mind that understood too much and learned too fast? The pain in her eyes had disappeared, Nedu noted with interest. Had he deluded himself about the memory of that fateful day? Maybe she had found peace and slipped back under the blessed veil of obliviousness? Or had she just learned to hide it from this cruel world that sought to exploit one's every weakness? ##. Isuku excitedly scribbled into his notebook. This lesson was so interesting. He got to learn so much about the character of his classmates. While he would have rather discovered more about their quirks, instead he knew that a psychological evaluation was also important to determine their optimal strategies as heroes. For example, Kuda had hesitated to kill his hostage Siro despite the game not being real and as a result had ended up tangled up in the tape he produced. A potential weakness that was endearing, but could cost his life if not corrected. Bakugu had been as angry as always and had blasted off without listening to his teammate. Unsurprisingly, his aggressive strategy had gifted him the win, although Ms. Argent seemed pretty displeased with it. He himself had been picked as a hero together with Yaoyorozu, which he guessed had something to do with the fact that he couldn't really use All Might's quirk at the moment. Yaoyorozu could basically create anything she knew the atomic makeup of, so he could fight with access to support items. Indeed, her flash grenades had been the key to victory for them both against Hagakure and Mina. He was calling another girl by her first name. How cool. His mom would be proud if he had the courage to tell her about it. Suddenly someone shook his shoulder and he instinctively flinched. Deku, lesson is over. We have to go. Why is, Ochako? He could feel his cheeks flushing red. ##. You wanted to talk to me after class, Miss Digurchaf? Yes, I want you to explain a few things to me. Specifically, the fire aspect of your quirk. Shoto's fist clenched at his side and his voice involuntarily grew tight as he asked. What about it? Does it only allow you to create small flames? No. Then why do you only use it to free your opponents caught in your ice during training exercises? Why is it any of your business how I use my quirk? Because I'm your teacher, which you should keep in mind when you are talking to me. Now answer the question. It's because I can become Japan's top hero without using my father's flames. My ice will be enough alone. I see, so you openly admit that you haven't been performing to the best of your abilities this entire time, and your reasoning for doing so is nonsensical. Shoto grinds his teeth and grits out, if that's all you needed to say, am I free to go? You are not until I dismiss you, which depending on the rest of this conversation, might be on a permanent basis. What are you saying? That you are very close to being expelled from this school, Todoroki Shoto? What? You can't do that. Actually, as I can file a formal complaint to the principal about your behavior within 5 minutes, it would be rather easy. Seeing as Mr. Aizawa has expelled entire classes for less, I think it would be approved immediately. But you wouldn't. I'm the top student of my year and son of the number 2 hero in the country. UA wouldn't risk the public backlash. Any negative press generated from your expulsion would pale in comparison to that brought about by having a lazy and careless hero associated with this school. Especially when, not if, but when you inevitably let someone die because you didn't utilize your quirk to its fullest. UA has a reputation of producing the finest heroes in Japan, and having someone as arrogant as yourself become an alumnus would tarnish that reputation. Then I'd just go to another school. Any hero school in the country would take me. Tanya shrugged behind her desk and leaned her elbows on it, fingers crossed in front of her. Perhaps, but expulsion is a black mark on your record, and when the reason behind it is revealed, it will form a powerful stigma around you. It's cost versus benefit at that point. Do they risk dealing with such a troublesome, albeit prestigious student who may very well become a subpar hero? The potential negative association you'd bring them might very well be enough to dissuade any from accepting you. Shoto was practically shaking with cold fury by now, but managed to ask, what do you want? It's quite simple actually. You are going to go speak to the counselor, Hound Dog, about whatever your issues with the fire aspect of your quirk are, while also utilizing said fire during training exercises from now on. If I feel you aren't giving your all during these exercises, I won't hesitate to expel you, understand? The young man did not answer as he glared at the diminutive woman, but she simply quirked a brow and repeated herself. I asked if you understand, Todoroki. I understand. I'll use his fire during exercises, he says, voice low. Once I graduate and become a pro hero, I can prove to you and everyone else that my ice is enough. Tanya hummed and leaned back in her seat, picking up a paper on her desk and reading it, no longer focusing on the boy. We'll see, she said simply. You are dismissed. Shoto held his glare for a few seconds longer before he turned around and stiffly walked out of the classroom. Tanya would wait a few weeks to see what her colleague, Hound Dog, had to say about the issue and how much the boy began to improve before she decided whether to follow through with her threat. Should worst come to worst, she would need to bring the issue before the principal and convince him to expel him for his dangerous arrogance. Since she had no authority to do so without his approval, the whole affair could potentially get quite tedious, so she rather wanted to avoid that. Nonetheless, even if it meant more work for her, she would give her best and make the most rational decisions. She worked HR in a previous life after all, and was no stranger to firing underperforming employees. Hopefully this one wouldn't try to kill her for it this time, though. Hound Dog groaned while he sifted through the pile of papers on his desk. So much extra work at the beginning of the school year was unprecedented. It would cut much into his free time to suitably analyze these notes, but in a strange way he was kind of thankful for that. After all, it meant that the kids were getting proper help for their problems instead of bottling them up internally until they broke. He sadly reminisced about the few cases he had the displeasure of handling in the past. Especially in a stressful job like theirs, burnout, psychosis, trauma and emotional detachment were far too common. Hopefully he could assist them in healing old mental wounds and give them the tools to guard against new ones. He would be even more satisfied if Nedu had accepted his proposal to send all students of Class 1A into therapy, but alas. The animal must have had a reason, although he would not tell him. The newcomer to the faculty, Argent, or as her fans called her online, the 11th goddess, seemed more reasonable and had already sent multiple people to his office. There was something strange about the young woman, but he would not pry as long as she continued to take her role as teacher seriously. More seriously than Eraserhead, certainly. After he spoke with the stuttering, mumbling mess that was Midoriya and the ice-cold, closed-off Todoroki, he could not understand how that man had not immediately set them up for a psychological evaluation. Well, he could guess the answer. It started with Lotsie and ended with Ness. As good as Aizawa was with combat and strategic thinking, his pedagogic skills left much to be desired. He cared for his students, that much was obvious, but he had problems showing that and putting it into practice beyond throwing himself between them and danger. The USJ incident had shown that. While the Erasure hero had not thought twice about risking his own life for the well-being of his pupils, he had not accepted any of the presents or visitors to his hospital bed. It was concerning that he kept everybody, including the other teachers, who cared about him at a distance, barely participating in any other activities outside of work. Well, it was one of the hard truths Ryo had to learn early on in his career, that you simply could not help everybody. He could only dearly hope that Aizawa would come to him when it all became too much for him to bear alone. On another note, Argent displayed some noteworthy characteristics as well. To have risen so high in the national hero rankings at such a young age was not the product of luck, but of talent honed by years of brutal training. Hound Dog could not imagine what the young woman must have gone through on her path to adulthood to already have that much experience. Whatever it had been, it could not have been healthy for a developing mind. Children needed time to grow and discover themselves. Too much training and not enough freedom could lead to all sorts of abnormalities in the human psyche. Ryo had noticed the alarming absence of close friends or family on her contact information sheet. Instead, only the hotline of the Hero Public Safety Commission was listed as the closest confidant. Either she was an orphan or had no contact to her family on top of being socially isolated. Perhaps he was interpreting too much into those signs, but it was always good to keep small details like this in the back of your mind. So far she had shown herself, during their 2 meetings, as a confident, will-strong individual with a focused and objective outlook on life. Nothing to officially worry about. Personally, though, he was not sure about what hid behind those sharp, radiating eyes of hers. ##. Tanya was drinking a cup of coffee at one of her favorite outdoor cafes when she suddenly spoke up, seemingly at random towards the crowd. "I hope the blood you used for that disguise was ethically sourced through the HPSC and not stolen." Himiko, a plain-looking girl who had been walking absently in Tanya's direction, suddenly froze, a frown forming on her lip as she groaned. "Senpai, how do you always know it's me?" Not looking up from the papers she was grading, Tanya gestured to the seat across from her as she answered. "I'd recognize the smell of blood no matter how faint." I take it your last mission was a success? The girl plopped down into the cushioned seat, smiling far too widely for the thin face she was wearing. Yep, she chirped. I've made contact with the League and convinced them that I want to join. They bought the story that I was ostracized for my quirk and now want to destroy society because of it without a second thought. She snickered as she added, "What a bunch of rubes." Tanya finally lifted her eyes from the stack of papers to give the shapeshifter a dry look. Weren't you initially ostracized for the blood requirements of your quirk and nearly driven insane as a result? Himiko rolled her eyes. Well yeah, but that was before I met you, senpai, and you saved me and vouched for me to the HPSC. She sighed wistfully in remembrance. You were like my own knight in shining armor. Tanya quirked a brow. I restrained you when you ambushed me in an alleyway, then dragged you to the police? Yes, but then you visited me while I was in custody and told me my quirk could help people? I was merely pointing out the obvious undercover hero work your quirk could be utilized for. Anyone could see the value in being able to perfectly mimic others. Himiko's expression became serious. Anyone could, but it took 8 years after I discovered my quirk for you to be the first to tell me that it wasn't evil. She looked down at the table and mumbled, Sometimes I still wonder how terrible things would have been had I chosen anyone else to be my first victim that day. It's pointless to worry about what-ifs, Tanya lectured as she put away her graded papers and sat back to enjoy the rest of her coffee. Himiko grinned once more. I guess you're right, especially because I never could have chosen anyone other than the cutest, most adorable girl in the whole world that day. The way you were pouting was just the sweetest thing ever. Yeah, just like that. So adorable. Tanya brushed the finger pointing at her face aside and did her best to smooth out her annoyed expression. Need I remind you that I am both 3 years your senior and your superior? Nope. You're the boss, Chibi-senpai. Tanya resisted the urge to growl at the infuriating nickname and reminded herself that Himiko Toga, codenamed Carmilla, was a valuable asset to the HPSC. A natural prodigy who was not only able to meet all scholastic requirements in order to finish high school at the age of 14, but had also managed to earn her Special Operations Hero license in only 1 additional year of training. Even Tanya herself was impressed, though she would never actually tell the girl to what extent. Himiko was already incorrigible without her knowing how much Tanya respected the younger women's skills and keen, albeit odd intellect. How much longer will that disguise you're wearing last? Tanya asked to change the subject, causing Himiko to put a finger to her lower lip in thought. Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. Why? The barely contained smile turned into a full-blown grin as Tanya slammed her empty cup down, tossed some bills on the table, stood up and grabbed Himiko's wrist to drag her to the nearest alleyway away from public view where a, literally, melting girl would no doubt cause panic. Oh, senpai, what are we going to do in here? Himiko asked in a sensual tone, wagging her eyebrows suggestively. Tanya chose to ignore the cackling gremlin's attempts at flustering her by looking away and gesturing in an impatient fashion. You're no fun, hee-hee, giggled the younger girl whose form began to promptly slough off to reveal a naked blonde girl with cat-like features underneath. Sometimes she didn't know which is crazier. This quirked-up world she's found herself in, or the people in it. Administrator Mojin, called Ems by most, looked over the reports for today. He was the handler of both Agent Argent and Agent Carmilla, 2 of their most exceptional assets. Normally only 1 subject would be assigned per supervisor, but due to the unusual nature of their relationship it was deemed more appropriate for their cases to be processed together. Of course, while that was simply a way of saving additional budget for the higher-ups, it only meant more work for him, especially considering that they were often used apart from each other in different operations. The sheer amount of paperwork that went over his desk each day was madness-inducing. Next year he would plead for a reassignment at Central Management if he hadn't suffered a burnout by then. He forcefully calmed himself down with the help of his quirk, clear head that let him slow the brainwaves of any individual within a certain radius. A handy quirk, but thankfully not powerful enough that the higher-ups had deemed him operationally applicable. He did not want to be thrown in the meat grinder that was the Special Operations Unit, no thank you. Mojin valued his life very much, regardless of how shitty his job could be at times. At least he had the potential for promotion now that he was basically spearheading the newest brainchild of the modern tactics department. Even if the paperwork was absurd, he had the satisfaction of knowing that his efforts were being watched by those above. The elusive committee had many careful eyes trained on his charges. While agents Argent and Carmilla may act independently at the moment, it would not be long until Protocol 21749 be triggered and they would be deployed together again. The Mirror Image Initiative had been declared a success 4 months ago after all, and the Modern Tactics Department was filling binders upon binders with new theoretical applications for the two-man team. Or should he call it a two-woman team? Irrelevant. Since the moment Argent had been given responsibility for subject Carmilla, who back then had been simply registered as Vampire, they had trained together. Argent was the committee's favorite agent produced by the Legacy program. Sometimes Mojin wondered why the ones above not simply acquired more children to mold into perfect heroes when Argent and Hawks had been such perfect achievements. Subtly creating more orphans was well within their capabilities, and more candidates would lead to an increase in production. Oh well, it wasn't his job to think about such things. Absent-mindedly, he stamped another report describing the internal workings of UA High School by Argent. Why even bother reading it when all the information was unimportant anyway? Who cared what kind of coffee they drank or which students had problems with algebra? A pure waste of time. Carmilla, on the other hand, damn, that girl was on a killing spree. 2 crime lords in 1 week. As opposed as some of the eggheads in central management had been to her recruitment, it was clear the investment had paid off. Her Quirk's transformation was simply an amazing skill for infiltration and intelligence gathering. Not to mention her superhuman speed and agility that made her the deadliest knife wielder in the whole association. If he hadn't seen the videos himself, then he would not have believed what that girl could do with a blade. An amazing tool that was as effective as it was versatile. Those numbers she achieved were bound to gather favor from the higher-ups. He could already smell that promotion. ##. Tanya sat down at a rare abandoned table in a corner of UA cafeterias for lunch. Normally, she would eat from a bento box in the teacher's lounge while working on some paperwork, but dealing with a villain attack near her apartment complex in the early morning led to her running late and forgetting her lunch. However, when she smelled the meal lunch rush prepared for her, she began to think that perhaps that was not such a bad thing. Especially as she eyed the large piece of chocolate cake that the man had packed on the upper right corner of her tray. A few minutes into enjoying her lunch, a pair of shadows fell over the ruins of her feast, and she looked up to see 2 of her students, Azuityu and Uraraka Ochako. The former had her hand on the latter's shoulder, who looked quite flustered and ready to flee, not unlike a frightened rabbit. "Hello, Ms. Digurchaf, may we sit with you?" "Ribbit?" Tanya quirked a brow, but politely answered, "Of course, please take a seat." Once the girls settled down with their own trays, she continued, "Is there something you'd like to discuss with me? Concerns? Schoolwork? Nothing like that. Ochako-chan is just a really big fan of yours and wanted to ask for your autograph." Ribbit Azui explained bluntly. At the revelation, Uraraka's face grew even redder and she whined, "Sue, you're embarrassing me in front of our teacher." Azui blinked at her friend. "There's no reason to be embarrassed, I'm also a fan." "Ribbit?" "I see," Tanya said evenly, prompting Uraraka to hurriedly explain herself. It's just, I know you said you don't think of yourself exclusively as a rescue hero, but you're still one of the best in that regard, and I'm aiming to be a rescue hero myself. Honestly, you and 13 are some of my biggest inspirations. You are an inspiration to all of us girls who want to become heroes." Ribbit, Azui added. "You're strong, intelligent, and hardworking. Everything a good hero should be." "Ribbit?" Tanya's lip twitched upwards and she sighed. "I suppose I can sign something if you have dash." Before she could even finish, Uraraka thrust her notebook forward. Idly, she noted that the cover had been extensively decorated, featuring a menagerie of female heroes such as Mirko, Ryukyu, Midnight, and even Tanya herself, surprisingly. Tanya blinked, but accepted the notebook and proffered pen, deciding to sign the inside cover. As she did so, she remarked, "A rescue hero, HM? I suppose I can see the rationale behind that considering your quirk." Uraraka nodded enthusiastically at that. Yeah, with zero gravity, I can easily lift fallen debris, no matter how heavy, to find civilians caught in disaster zones. Tanya closed the cover and slid it back to her student. Yes, and it also lends itself well utilizing a wide array of support gear to aid in that endeavor. Uraraka stared at her uncomprehendingly. What do you mean? Tanya tilted her head, thumb and forefinger on her chin as she thought it over and explained. A camera, for instance, perhaps designed like those tumbler dolls young children play with. That is to say, one that's designed to orientate itself directly downwards. With your quirk, you could float it high above the site of a disaster to get a bird's eye view of the area. Since your quirk provides the lift, it could be quite compact, and with added thermal imaging, it would make identifying civilians in need of rescue significantly easier instead of merely using your quirk to lift every large piece of debris randomly in search of them. After all, in our line of work, time is always of the essence, and every second you save in rescuing someone is another moment medical professionals have to stabilize their condition. Another idea suddenly came to her mind and she snapped her fingers in annoyance that she hadn't thought of it immediately. Also, you should seriously consider a jetpack or grappling hook of some sort. Maybe even both, why not? I saw in the footage of the battle trial that you can briefly remove gravity from yourself as well, so you should seriously consider upping your air mobility to properly take advantage of that. Just short bursts of your quirk should be enough to get you from street level to a nearby roof in seconds if you can maneuver more than just flying in a straight line. When Tanya returned her attention to her bubbly student, she found her writing furiously in her newly signed notebook as she nodded emphatically, eyes sparkling like a certain green-haired boy when he was taking notes about other people's quirks. Those are all great ideas. Thank you, Sense. Are there any other support items you think would work well with my quirk? Tanya contemplated the question for a moment, then brought her hands up as if pulling back the string of an invisible bow. Projectiles. Specifically manually loaded and powered ones like a bow and arrow. No, a slingshot would be more compact and easier to carry on patrols. By using your quirk on the projectile itself before firing, you would no longer have to account for drop-off while aiming, making it easier and more accurate. As I said during my first class, rescue or combat heroes shouldn't expect not to have to be competent in both fields, and you will have to fight villains during your career. A good weapon will be useful in such a situation. Yes, Sensei, Uraraka declared more seriously as she wrote that down. And thank you for the advice. Tanya simply nodded and was about to return to her meal. That chocolate cake was practically calling her name, when she suddenly remembered that there was more than one student at her table. Looking over, she saw Azui staring at her, finger on her lip and head slightly tilted. Is there something you'd like to ask as well, Azui? Ribbit? Is there any support equipment I should add to my kit, or advice on better ways to use my quirk? Tanya held back the sigh that threatened to escape her and gazed sadly at her dessert that was growing staler by the second. Alas, she is a teacher, and she would be remiss in her duties not to advise one of her students when requested. You can cling to most surfaces, yes? Would that perhaps include skin and clothing? Tanya asked. Azui blinked, turned to her friend and poked the other girl's hand. After a moment, she tugged and pulled Uraraka's arm with her slightly, who just stared at the point of contact with confusion. Then Azui moved her finger to instead touch the sleeve of her shirt and repeated the process. I can cling to both, but not as well to the fabric. Ribbit? I figured as much, still, that will contribute greatly to grip strength, which in turn will lend itself well to maintaining holds on opponents, such as limb locks and the like. I suggest looking into a grappling-based martial art, such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. With your quirk-aided grip, even a technically sloppy hold will be significantly harder for an opponent to break out of, and will help in non-lethal captures. I also know you have exceptionally powerful legs, which beyond your impressive jump height and distance, means you should be able to kick like a truck. Perhaps you should think about incorporating those into your fighting style as well. Once she was done speaking, Tanya carefully observed the young girl's face, and although her expression was the same as always, Tanya could practically see Azui's eyes sparkling as she said, "Thank you, Sensei. I'll take your advice into consideration." "I'm glad I could help," Tanya replied evenly, quickly eating a mouthful of food to hopefully stave off any more questions. Lunch Rush's meal was far more delicious than what she would normally bring to school, but perhaps she should take it to the teacher's lounge next time in order to enjoy it in peace. She was all for helping her new students out whenever possible, but even her patience has limits, and letting perfectly good desserts grow cold and stale comes dangerously close to pushing them. They could take her freedom, but never her culinary enjoyment. Hopefully she would not be transferred to a new case anytime soon. Foundational heroics was ridiculously simple to teach. So simple in fact that Tanya was unsure if she had perhaps misinterpreted the curriculum and was conducting the class wrong. Just sharing a few pieces of wisdom from her experience as a pro hero with the eagerly listening students and then showing them hand-to-hand combat techniques couldn't be all that was required of her, right? Luckily, All Might was coming back next week so he could show her how it was done. A pro of his caliber was bound to be bursting with wisdom and useful strategies for the newbies to absorb. What else did she have to teach, besides basic melee, a few tactics and common sense? Tanya was certain that she was doing far worse than her precursor in that position. Still, she gave her best. Midoriya, raise your arm higher. Feet further apart and deep breaths. Understood? Yes, Ms. Argent. Remember, only when you achieve control of your body can you achieve control over superpower. Pure strength alone isn't going to cut it when you want to master utilizing your quirk. Yes? Good. Yaoyorozu, nice work. I think it would be beneficial if you could show Kirishima the grapple again. He hasn't quite gotten that move down yet. Of course, sensei. Bakugu, it is good to see that you take this exercise seriously, but please go over to a different station now. Any more strain on your legs and you could hurt yourself. He only grunted in reply, but did stop from trying to kick the moving punching bag any further. Although his demeanor was lackluster and his attitude tolerable at best, he did have potential. Should his behavior become more pronounced, then Tanya would not hesitate to send him to Hound Dog as well. The explosive teen could do great harm if that nasty temper got the better of him. A problem child of the different kind was sitting at the edge of the gym, badly pretending to perform stretches. Instead he was ogling Ishido's and Ochako's shapely behinds, which were even more pronounced due to their skin-tight costumes. My Netta, this is the third time I have to warn you to take this seriously. Any further harassment of your classmates will result in detention. But Ms. Argent, I was just doing stretches dash. Do not lie to me, boy. Deception is part of hero work, but it has no place in school. For that poor attempt of a lie, I want 3 pages on the practical applications of lying until tomorrow. But I dash. Do not complete that sentence if you don't want to add another page to your essay. Also, you should really show more effort in your training. It is disgraceful how far behind your classmates you are. Show some of that plus ultra spirit UA is known for, or you are going to find yourself expelled faster than I can say it's pervert. Did she really just call him a pervert? Asked Kaminari incredulously. Yeah, but he is one though. No shame in saying the truth, added Jairu from behind him. I guess. Meanwhile, Tanya was busy with convincing Kuda to punch Tokoyami harder than a slap. It was truly a miracle that the pacifistic boy had made it through the entrance exam. Perhaps teaching normal children was not as simple as she had at first presumed. ##. The next day, Tanya sat in the quiet teacher's lounge and ate the meal Lunch Rush had graciously allowed her to take from his cafeteria. She was glad that most of the faculty chose to eat in the large meeting room instead of here to have discussions over their lunch. Really, she probably should be doing the same, if for no other reason than to gather more intel for the HPSC, but with all the craziness she had to put up with in this madhouse of a school on a near-daily basis, she thought she deserved this momentary respite. Or not, she thought bitterly as a shadow once more fell over her and her meal. Already she can sense her chocolate eclair becoming soggier by the second as the tasty cream seeps into the buttery pastry. Tanya-chan, what cha doing down here all by yourself again? Don't you know all the cool cats are upstairs? Putting her utensils down with forced calm, she looked up at her fellow teacher and hero, Yamada Hizashi, and spoke coolly. I think you meant Tanya-san, Mr. Yamada, and yes, I am aware the rest of the faculty is currently upstairs. I chose to eat down here willingly. The man faltered a moment under her icy gaze, but recovered quickly as he leaned a forearm onto the table and placed his other hand on his hip. My mistake, Tanya-san, but I still gotta know why. Isn't it boring eating all by yourself? You'd be more than welcome with us. He snapped his fingers as if coming to a revelation. You're not intimidated by the thought of sitting with so many senpais, are you? I know we're a bunch of experienced pros, but we're all very humble, you know. Tanya quirked a brow. Yes, so humble. Still, you're mistaken, if only taking into account the fact that, other than All Might, I'm currently the highest-ranked hero in the faculty, and thus, technically your senpai, not that I put much stock into such things. Hisashi's eyebrow twitched and a frown pulled at his lips, but Tanya continued. Regardless, my choice to eat here instead of in the meeting room simply stems from my wish for some peace and quiet before returning to class. So, that being said, if there's nothing else you need. Not taking the hint for what it was, Hisashi instead sighed and pulled up a seat to plop down. Okay, asking you to eat with the rest of us isn't the only reason I wanted to talk to you, the man explained, demeanor more serious now. It's because of Shota. At the mention of that name, it was Tanya's turn to frown as she asked, what about him? He's still recovering, yes? Have there been any complications? If so, then rest assured that I'm willing to stay enrolled as a teacher for as long as necessary. Hisashi chuckled. Nah, his recovery is coming along just fine. Heck, if he had it his way, he'd already be back and tormenting his students with logical ruses and sleeping in his sleeping bag under the desk, but Principal Nedu won't let him. He sleeps under his desk? Tanya asked incredulously, her already low opinion of the man dropping even further. While her first life had made her familiar with the concept of inamuri, that is, sleeping in the office being common and socially accepted as it was seen as a sign of diligence, she had never personally partook in any life. To her, it wasn't a sign that a person was so dedicated to their job that they worked themselves to exhaustion, but instead a display of one's mismanagement of personal resources. Bad diet and sleeping habits lead to running out of energy before your job was properly finished. Hisashi didn't share her opinion apparently, as he just barked out a quick laugh. Yeah, it's a pretty funny sight, seeing Shota slink around like an inchworm. The students always love it when they discover that he uses the vent tunnels for a short nap during the breaks. I'm sure. Tanya mumbled, clearly unamused. Sensing this, the voice hero cleared his throat and barreled on. Anyway, what I mean is that Shota has been hounding me about his students. He wants to know how they're doing in your class and all that, so I told him I'd talk to you about it. I see. Tanya said flatly, leaning back in her seat and folding her hands on the table. If that is the case, you can tell Mr. Aizawa that all is going well with MY students. Hisashi blinked behind his yellow-tinted shades. Your students? Yes, as a matter of fact, I've been making great strides in correcting the mistakes of Mr. Aizawa's frankly atrocious teaching methods. She explained almost acidly before reining herself back in. Frowning, Hisashi began to say, mistakes? I know Shota's teaching methods can be a bit unorthodox, but unorthodox? Is that what we're calling sheer laziness now? Tanya interrupted. Please, enlighten me if you can, the unorthodox nature in letting a student, who until only recently and only rectified because of my intervention, was crippling himself with every activation of his quirk, or how another's obvious traumas were preventing him from utilizing half of his power. And yet Mr. Aizawa was content to merely sit back and watch these errors unfold in the hopes that they would work themselves out without any effort on his part. If he hoped they would at all. She snorted derisively and added, the fact that he cannot even show enough respect to his students and coworkers to take care of his appearance or sleep the appropriate amount at home, shows me how much he is invested in the education of the next generation of heroes. No wonder his expulsion rates are astronomical if he only accepts naturally gifted students that he doesn't have to personally train. If not for his actions at the USJ, one could almost believe he was actively hoping his students would get themselves killed out in the field. Hey, that's going too far, snapped Hisashi, slamming a fist down on the table. Shota might not be perfect, but if there's one thing he cares about, it's ensuring his students live long lives as heroes. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Yamada, Tanya replied, voice frigid. And Mr. Aizawa's actions speak of gross negligence at best, and disdain for his job at worst. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to finish my meal while it's still at least somewhat warm. You can tell your friend that the students of Class 1A are in good hands, better ones, and that their education and training are coming along smoothly. When Hisashi opened his mouth to argue, Tanya simply tacked on a firm, "Goodbye, Mr. Yamada," while returning her attention to her food and picking up her utensils. The man stood up abruptly, and his shadow lingered above her for nearly a whole minute, until finally receding when he turned around with a huff of indignation and stomped out of the room. Once she heard the door slam shut, Tanya released a breath that sounded more like a growl and clenched a fist around her fork. Was this going to be a new routine now? Was she going to be interrupted at every lunch? Idly, she wondered if it would be considered rude to maintain a barrier over the door in the future to discourage people from bothering her. ##. Yes, Mr. Principal, you wanted to speak with me? Ms. Degirchaf. You are as punctual as your reputation claims. It is always good to work with people who respect your time. Indeed. Their gazes locked momentarily and the world seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Would you like some tea? The white creature of unidentified origin suddenly asked with a charming smile that instantly broke the tension. No, thank you. Although he would never poison her, so unsubtle her paranoia was on an all-time high. A shame. It was a new brand I ordered from the Philippines just yesterday. It is supposed to be extremely relaxing. I thought you could use some after your first intense few days at our lovely school and that exhilarating battle before class today. Oh, it was nothing. I needed to withdraw some money and he chose that time to rob the exact same bank. I would say that was simply bad luck on both our parts. Is that so? Nedu asked with a twinkle in his beady eyes, his paws busy with preparing the beverage. Tanya just shrugged and hummed noncommittally. Nonetheless, it was a fairly intimidating villain you fought today. A quirk that turned his whole body into a super hard and durable chainsaw blade is no easy thing to work around. The press are already calling him the monster of the week. A very insulting term in my opinion. Pray tell. That infuriating conversation with present Mike in the teacher's lounge had obviously put her more off balance than she believed, if she fell so easily for Nedu's traps. Although perhaps she could use this opportunity in her favor. Well, I only got sent a preliminary summary of the case file an hour ago, so I am no expert, but from what he was yelling, young Irakaka was probably a victim of mutant quirk discrimination throughout his whole life. His resume shows that he graduated from high school with above-average grades and attempted to find a job, but no business was willing to employ him. If that was caused by either bigoted beliefs or an inability to house his abnormally large frame is unclear at the moment, but at least he seemed to believe that it was the fault of his admittedly grotesque appearance. So you think that he attacked the bank out of desperation? Yes. I am by no means condoning his actions that put innocent people at risk, but I can empathize with his desire to escape the downward spiral he found himself in. Social programs failed him, because he is technically still living with his family, but his father has gone missing for several years and his mother is severely disabled. The money their insurance provides is apparently not enough to sustain her treatment and pay the rent for their apartment. Add unemployment and an absent father into the mix, and I believe it becomes pretty clear why he resorted to robbery in the end. Impressive. You managed to glean all that from the few scraps of information the police released. How marvelous, he grinned, making it clear that he had known the whole story already. Humans are normally not too complex if you abstract their behavior a bit. The motivations for crimes stay the same throughout history. Greed, fear, desperation, and a lust for vengeance are in my experience the most common causes for people to turn a weapon against their neighbors. From an analytical standpoint, Irakaka made a somewhat logical decision when he went against the law. He believed that society had failed him after all, so he tried a different approach. The definition of insanity is to try the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Subsequently, he went for the only other option his young and inexperienced brain knew from watching the daily news. So you partly blame the media for promoting villainy? A bold claim that I am sure would make for an excellent research paper. Turning a normal, young man into a violent criminal. Yes, Yes, that would create quite the stir in the public perception of news coverage. Humans are truly scariest when they suppress their emotions in favor of calculated goals. No. Damn it. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. Now Nedu looked like a hungry shark which had smelled blood in the water. Tanya would need to indulge his curiosity or else he would probably not let this topic drop easily. Oh, you disagree? Yes. Humans are then at their most dangerous and depraved when they forego logical reasoning and premeditated ideals. It is their inability to ignore their misguided feelings that has led to so much misery and senseless violence over the course of history. Yes. Naturally, not thinking things properly through is the mother of most problems, but it is also that trait which enables much good in our society. A hero rushing towards a victim to save them even at the cost of their own health or life is, while not strictly objective, admirable action. He was doing this to test her. She knew that. By not keeping her mouth shut when she really should, Tanya had opened a can of worms that would sooner or later explode in her face. Whatever he wanted to verify about her character could be crucial to the continuation of her mission. And yet, by throwing their life away too hastily, the hero may doom many more innocents when they are unable to come to their rescue. Prioritizing one's overall ability to keep working over the well-being of others is the most reasonable reaction from an evolutionary standpoint. An evolutionary standpoint, you say? How interesting. What a remarkable opinion for a professional hero to have. It sounded serious, but she immediately realized that he was mocking her. Or was this another test? I am fully aware that it may sound cold to civilian ears, but you and I both know that the world is more complicated than the rose-tinted version the government is trying to show us. Sacrifices for the overall prosperity of the system have to be made all the time. The needs of the many outweigh that of the few. Even all might cannot save everyone. If what the report says is true, then he only showed up late to the USJ disaster because he was preoccupied with stopping muggings and rescuing cats from trees on the way. Had he arrived just a few seconds later, a student or teacher could have paid with their lives for that mistake. I quite agree. It was reckless of him to neglect his duties as a teacher like that. He is still very much stuck in his symbol of peace mindset. Hurriedly, she used his admission to change the topic. Tanya knew that he would detect her diversion right away. Administrator M had warned her of his superhuman intelligence multiple times, so she decided to be blunt about it. As gripping as this discussion is, you hardly made me come here for idle banter, did you, Mr. Principal? True enough, my dear Ms. de Gurchaf. Say, how have you settled in at this fine institution? Well enough. I admit it can be challenging to take care of so many children at once, but it is nothing I cannot handle. Teaching is certainly a very gratifying profession if one is able to watch young heroes learn and develop over time. Fascinating. He smiled at her serenely, but she could see the glint of steel in his eyes. And the other teachers are treating you well, I hope? So that was what this meeting was about. She wanted to slap herself for not figuring it out sooner. They are nice enough. We didn't have much time to get to know each other yet. Seeing as Eraserhead is allegedly insisting on resuming his scholastic duties as soon as possible, I will sadly not get the chance to do so either. Tanya would miss the food very much. And lecturing or overseeing a bunch of kids was also far safer and cushier than going out in the streets to fight crime. Well, it seems that your opinion of Aizawa is not very high. Rumors are already spreading that you would try to permanently replace him. Oh, she could imagine who was behind this smear campaign. Whoever is spreading such nonsense should wash their ears and learn to think before opening their mouth. I never expressed such a thing, nor did I ever think of it. I merely expressed my displeasure about some of his educational failings. The tea had long since finished brewing and the white rodent finally settled behind his desk, holding his cup with both paws like a sacred treasure. I see. But you are really missing out on this excellent flavor. I am afraid that next time I will have to insist that you partake in at least a mouthful. I would deeply regret it if you missed out on the opportunity to enjoy this blend. Of course. Was this a threat? Some cryptic message? What kind of game was Nedu playing here? But alas, maybe my taste is just different from humans? Perhaps what I find pleasant about this tea is totally lost on your kind. Or are you noticing other sensations that I cannot experience? A human brain is more complex than an animal brain after all. Appealing to his ego with the truth would hopefully ease the strain on their barely formed work relationship. Humans are for the most part like any other animal, impulse-driven, reliant largely on instinct and pattern recognition and without true thought or comprehension of the world around them. To claim that they are something special in the universe is one of the greatest lies ever invented. Ha! Wonderful. Why do we fight for them then? What are we hoping to accomplish by helping out these animals, as you described them? That is the question, she answered diplomatically. That is the question, he repeated quietly, sipping his tea and nodding at her. Wordlessly she bowed and left his office, not knowing if she had failed or passed his evaluation. The end of the week came quicker than expected. So much had happened between her acting as a pro-hero on the streets and as a teacher in school, that time seemed to fly by like a bullet. Even though she had met the members of 1A only a few days ago, most of the kids had already grown on her in some weird way. Midoriya's enthusiasm for learning and improving, Yaoyorozu's surprisingly insightful commentary, Uraraka's cheery optimism that reminded her of Himiko. They would make for excellent heroes, as stupid as the whole profession was. Not all of them, naturally, but those that were willing to work on themselves and become stronger and better for it. If they were lucky, they would only be active for 5 or so years and then become popular marketing figures who barely stepped into actual danger zones anymore. At least she hoped that would happen to her, if the government let her. On the weekend she only had to teach 1 hour in the morning and then could go back home to do the paperwork that had accumulated over the course of the week. Being a solo pro-hero without an agency proved to be a hassle sometimes, but the flexibility and control over her life was something she treasured. The HPSC didn't care what she did as long as she satisfied the minimum amount of heroic actions to keep her spot in the rankings and stay visible in the media. Well, that and she had to accomplish special missions, of course, like spying on UA or luring a couple of disgraced heroes into spots where they could be conveniently ambushed by criminals. Normal stuff. Sunday she went out in her civilian getup, which was not a common occurrence. Sadly, if it didn't somewhat hide her features, then there was bound to be at least one fan who recognized her on the street only to then pester her with demands for autographs or photos. That could be useful for publicity, and she sometimes let herself be discovered accidentally, but it was also very annoying. Although some stores would give her products for free if she posted a photo of their business on her social media account, so that was a plus. But if she really wanted some privacy, then she would let her hair down, wear a pair of glasses and a medical face mask, and she would become practically invisible in public spaces. The citizens only knew her in a hero costume with a specific appearance, so nobody recognized the young blonde sitting on a park bench. Not to mention that she wasn't the only blonde in the park. "Hi Himiko," she greeted offhandedly. "Hello Tanya," replied the girl in the same serious tone before bursting out laughing. "Ha ha, very funny. You are always funny, senpai. Do you want me to schedule an emergency drill again? I had planned to take you to that new ice cream shop and then go to the zoo, but I guess a bit of extra training couldn't hurt, right?" "Oh no please. You are so mean senpai. Please, I'll never call you funny again." "Thought so. Now let's get going. I heard that they have a flavor with 3 different types of chocolate all at once." "That sounds awesome. But I want raspberry sorbet though." "It's just because the color reminds you of blood." "No it doesn't. I just like the taste." Sure. ##. Did you enjoy our day together, Himiko?" Tanya asked while looking at the setting sun over the ocean. Dagoba Beach had been mysteriously cleared about a month ago of all the trash that had once ruined the place, so she thought it would be a wonderful location to end their team-building dates before it got popular once again. "Image," hummed her partner affirmatively. "It was awesome. The baby seals were so cute." "Thanks senpai." Himiko's smile turned serious and she hugged Tanya around the side, bringing her mouth close to her ear. "You are the best, I really appreciate it. I don't know what I would do without you Tanya." "You re-welcome." Tanya allowed a rare true smile to flash across her features. Being valued so highly by your subordinate was a nice feeling. The sun appeared to nearly touch the shimmering surface of the endless ocean, filling the sky with countless shades of scarlet and orange. Together with Himiko's warm body at her side and the rhythmic breaking of the waves at the shore, it created an extraordinarily peaceful moment. She slightly turned her head to look at her fellow blonde only to find her licking her lips in that specific way that indicated that she was thirsty. It was one of Himiko's many mannerisms that she had picked up during their countless hours of joint training. "Did you take your dose today already?" she asked, concerned. "Well, I was so excited for what you had planned that I kinda forgot." The vampiric girl could be so neglectful at times. Any other day Tanya would have admonished her for forgetting something so simple, but today was different. Tanya honestly didn't want to make a scene and ruin the serene atmosphere. "Then do it now. You need to be well rested and fed before tomorrow." The normally confident girl uncharacteristically stuttered. "Come on. You can drink from me." "It's okay." Tanya held out her arm and pushed up the sleeve of her shirt to expose the pale flesh underneath. "Beeb, I don't have any diseases if you are afraid of that. And I just showered this morning so I am clean." Himiko looked at her with big vulnerable eyes and whispered, "Are you really okay with this?" "Yes. We have been partners for a while now. We killed for each other and we lied for each other. What is a little blood when compared to that?" Hesitantly, the younger girl reached out and took her arm before slowly raising it to her mouth, keeping eye contact the whole time. Unconsciously, Tanya's heart rate quickened when she felt the warm breath wash over her delicate skin. Then two small pricks of pain radiated from her outstretched limb as Himiko's small fangs sunk into her flesh and she began to suck at her wrist almost tenderly. The poor girl must have gotten quite cold from the sea breeze, because she clung harder to her and began to shiver. Not wanting to let her closest confidant get sick, she huddled closer to her and erected a silver, heat-insulating barrier around them to keep her warm. Rubbing soothing circles on her back, Tanya let her coworker feed off her blood for a while longer before she finally pulled away, seemingly satisfied. "I hope it didn't taste too bad. We ate a little too much ice cream today." "No. It was excellent," mumbled Himiko, who appeared to be intoxicated to some extent, judging from the faraway look in her lidded eyes and the manic grin on her red-painted lips. She looked so out of it that Tanya took pity on her and carefully cleaned her blood-stained mouth with a napkin. It wouldn't do for a random civilian to spot her with blood on her face. That would devolve into a PR nightmare. "Let's go home. You can sleep on my couch if you don't want to go back to the hideout. I'll text your location to Administrator M so you won't be in trouble." "MK," she muttered and fell headfirst into Tanya's chest, having already fallen asleep. With a bemused sigh, Argent created a barrier beneath them both and lifted them straight into the air until she reached a full kilometer in altitude and then began to push it through the sky at breakneck speeds. ##. It was Monday morning and Tanya was once again inconvenienced due to an ill-timed villain attack. This time it had been late at night right near the end of her patrol and resulted in a torn sleeve on her uniform. Much to Tanya's shame, she had suffered a momentary bout of laxity. Upon flying in through the window of her apartment, and simply tossed the ruined garment into her closet while she took a shower. Looking after Himiko, who had used her temporary absence to crawl into her bed, had been her priority at the time. How do you throw someone out of your resting place without being rude? In the end, she had simply taken the couch, only to find out later in the morning that the annoyingly snuggly girl had somehow ended up there too. It spoke of Himiko's impeccable skill as an infiltrator that she had managed to sneak under the sheets and cuddle up to her senpai without waking her, despite Tanya's finely honed senses. Anyone would understand how under such distracting circumstances the condition of her uniform had been forgotten. By the time she remembered and looked down to notice the damage, she was already halfway to UA and didn't have the time to turn back and switch out the jacket for a spare. And now here she was, currently rushing towards Kayama Namuri's classroom in hopes of procuring some materials to make a quick repair before anyone else caught her in such an unprofessional state. The R-rated hero taught modern art history, better known as the costume design class, so it stood to reason that she probably had at least a needle and thread somewhere in there. Luckily, Tanya arrived early as usual, and so the other heroine would most likely not be in just yet. "Oh my! Is the elusive Argent gracing my classroom with her presence?" A sultry voice said from down the hallway as Tanya had just opened the door to the room. Whatever could you want with me? Tanya glanced up to send a silent curse to being X before she turned to the older woman and pasted on a smile. Ah, hello Ms. Kiyama. I am sorry to intrude on you this fine morning, but I had an issue with my uniform and dash. There was a gasp as the other woman quickened her step, a wide smile pulling at her lips. Don't tell me. You're here to change your hero costume, aren't you? I just knew a cutie like you wouldn't want to stick with such a drab outfit. Those so-called designers at the HPSC probably thought it was the height of gap mode to dress a cute little girl like she was in the military, but it just doesn't work. Ah, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Hey. Before Tanya could explain herself, Nemuri had already dragged her into the classroom and begun riffling through a wardrobe near the back. Now, we obviously don't have time to go into detailed plans, but I know I have a few accessories to improve your image right away, things that will really up your cuteness. Like these, Nemuri said as she whirled around and held out a headband adorned with cat ears, which made Tanya recoil. Seemingly not caring, the woman aligned the headband with one open eye with Tanya's head, then frowned. Cute but not quite your style. Your fans call you the 11th goddess enough, so why not lean into it? Once again rummaging through the wardrobe, Nemuri rushed over and plopped something atop Tanya's head. Tanya was confused until Midnight held up a mirror. Seeing the halo now bobbing over her blonde hair, held aloft by a thin but rigid wire, nearly made Tanya send the horrible thing flying with a scream, but she managed to control herself enough to gingerly take it off and hold it far away from her person. I don't think so, she said. And really, while I appreciate the effort, I came here to dash. Go the magical girl route, of course. Nemuri finished wrongly as she hammered a fist into her palm. It's so obvious now. The Majako hero, Argent. I can picture it now. A short, puffed-out skirt, a skin-tight leotard, frills everywhere, and a tiara. You look adorable and sexy. Her expression turned into something that Tanya thought would be more appropriate on an old, lecherous man than a heroine as she mumbled. After all, nothing is hotter than the corruption of the pure and innocent. I can see the fan art already. Tanya formed a blade-shaped barrier behind her back and moved to create some distance between her and the deranged pervert before clearing her throat. Ms. Kiyama, while I appreciate your enthusiasm in trying to help me update my image, that's not what I came here for. Nemuri blinked free from her lewd stupor to look down at the smaller woman. You didn't? No, I didn't. I simply came in search of supplies to fix the sleeve of my jacket before school started. Tanya explained, holding up her arm for emphasis. The R-rated heroine sagged a little. Really? That's all? You want me to repair your jacket? I can perform the repairs myself. I just need a needle and some thread. Midnight shook her head and held out a hand. Nonsense, I will gladly do it. It's the least I can do after wasting so much of your time as it is. It's really not necessary. I know how. But classes start in only a few minutes. Do you really think you can do it in time? Tanya opened her mouth, but looked at the clock on the wall and closed it, lips forming a thin line while Nemuri's stretched out into a broad smile. Thought so, said the older woman. I'm a master with a needle and thread, though, and can have it done in no time at all. Tanya sighed, but pulled the jacket off and dropped it into Nemuri's waiting claws, leaving her in only her thin undershirt which made her feel surprisingly vulnerable. She certainly did not appreciate the other woman taking an unnecessary moment to eye her chest, and so quickly crossed her arms over it. There was hardly anything there to even look at anyway. True to her word, though, the immodestly dressed woman really did finish repairing in only a couple minutes, doing such a good job that Tanya could hardly even tell there had been a rip in the sleeve at all. Smiling, Tanya put the jacket back on and said, "Thank you. I appreciate your help." Midnight waved her off. "It's fine," she began, before her expression suddenly took on a scheming air. "Though, if you really want to thank me, there is one thing you could do." Blade reformed, Tanya hesitantly asked, "And that would be?" She was left blinking as the other woman ran back to the closet, only to quickly return, hands outstretched. "You have to wear this all day. You look adorable." Tanya was about to refuse, but one look into that eager expression, and a sudden reminder of a certain blonde pain who also had a penchant for calling Tanya things such as cute and adorable, and the girl caved. It was hardly that bad, and it would ingratiate her with a fellow staff member and heroine. Networking often required the sacrifice of some dignity, after all. Later, her students would find themselves staring at their teacher like she had grown another head instead of simply wearing a bright blue ribbon in her hair. So what have you learned today? Whoever answers the best gets extra credit. We learned that proper communication is important. Why does that sound like a question, Hagakure? Are you unsure? No, Ms. Argent. Yes. And that is the perfect example why verbal discipline on the field is so important. Facts have to be stated short, precise, and clearly phrased as statements, not unknowns. The sooner you internalize that, the better. What else have you learned? You told us that requesting clarification when we don't understand something is crucial, rather than being polite and staying oblivious. Exactly, Yaoyorozu. We now know that information itself is worth nothing if you cannot use it. Precisely, Jairu. Leaving one's foe entombed in a surplus of light may blind them to the darkness encroaching on them through their own shadow. And could someone please repeat that without trying to act out a Shakespeare play? I think Tokoyami means that bombarding your opponent with too much or false information can distract them from your real plans. Right? Very good, Ojiro. In the future, make it a habit to speak like you actually live in the 24th century, Tokoyami. That comes right back to our first point from Hagakure. People need to understand you or they want to be able to help you. Ms. Argent, you taught us today that being well-informed is the cornerstone of becoming a successful hero. We all need to learn the ins and outs of our gear, our surroundings, our teammates, and if possible our enemies before engaging. Without sufficient preparation we could risk endangering ourselves, or worse, the civilians we are sworn to protect. In fact, it would be the greatest dishonor to fail them by not adequately learning the details that the hero profession thrives upon. If we want to live up to the expectations placed on us by others, then it is imperative that we absorb as much useful knowledge as possible. Correct, Ida. Although you should aim to be more brief in your explanations. I did not ask you for your morals, but only for the strategies I told you today. No, don't apologize. Letting others know of your position regularly is essential for protecting yourself against ambushes. I only mentioned that offhandedly, so it is nice that you caught that, Midoriya. Anyways, what do we don't have time for that anymore. As homework I want you to scream the phrase, help. Request backup immediately. I need help, as loud as you can and as long as you can. Make sure to find a spot where you don't disturb the piece too much and don't hurt your vocal cords. Also write on a piece of paper why you think this exercise is important and bring it tomorrow for me to collect. Dismissed. ##. Tanya stepped through the door of her apartment and tossed her jacket on the nearby coat hanger before heading towards the bathroom for a quick rinse-off shower. As she walked by the entrance to her kitchen, however, her heightened sense for dangers suddenly flared and she quickly somersaulted away, throwing up her barriers and readying herself for a fight. However, instead of a villain or assassin sent to take her out, there was only Himiko. She was standing rigidly in the kitchen near the table and was facing her, but she had her head down and her fists were clenched into the front of her skirt. Tanya blinked and straightened from her combat stance, dismissing her silver barriers. Himiko? Is something wrong? Has something happened? You tell me, senpai. Toga spat, not lifting her gaze. More confused and chest tightening for some reason, Tanya took a hesitant step forward. Himiko? Please tell me what's wrong. I saw what? The pictures. They're all over social media. Himiko said as if that explained anything. Tanya was now close enough to reach out, though she hesitated, hand hovering as she didn't know what she was supposed to do. I still don't understand. You don't understand this? Himiko suddenly screamed, hand reaching into her pocket to whip out her smartphone, the screen lighting up to reveal a picture of Tanya in profile as she lectured in class. And judging by the bright blue ribbon in her hair that was now currently in her pocket, it was from today. Now Tanya was confused and angry that one of her students had taken their phone out during class. What? I'm just teaching. Why would that make you upset? There's a dozen of them. Himiko wailed with tears in her eyes as she swiped through the pictures. Some of her in hallways, some in the lunchroom, and a few more from the classroom from different angles, meaning she had more than one student to punish tomorrow. But right now, she had a very distraught girl to calm down, and that required her to first understand why these images made her so upset to begin with. Something that couldn't happen as long as the younger girl was a blubbering mess. Reaching out, Tanya grabbed her wrist, causing the phone to clatter to the ground, and pulled. Himiko resisted, but not as much as she could have, considering Tanya managed to move the physically stronger girl without use of her quirk. She wrapped her arms tightly around her middle and held Himiko's head to her chest while she rubbed soothing circles into her back. Those lessons on how to pacify distraught children during a crisis response were really coming in handy right now. "Shoo shoo," Tanya whispered. "Calm down, Himiko. It's all right, everything's going to be all right." "And no, it's not," was the whimpered response as Himiko's legs gave out, bringing both of their knees to the hardwood floor. "You've fallen in love, and now you're going to spend all of your time with them, and you aren't going to want to be around me because I'm weird and not cute, and I'd scare them off, and dash." "Fallen in love? Me?" Tanya asked, pulling back to search the girl's tear-stained face. "Who said that? And how would any of those pictures prove it?" Himiko rolled her eyes and sneered at her, which made Tanya's chest clench again with how unusual the expression was on her subordinate's face. "I'm not stupid, Tanya. I can see the ribbon, same as everyone else, and I know what that means. I know that you would never, ever wear something so adorable because it's too girly. Not unless someone really special gave it to you. Obviously, it's a gift from someone you love. Why else would you wear it, and in public, no less? I can barely get you to wear the Kiss the Cutie apron I got you when we cooked together, and that's only when it's just the two of us." Tanya stared gobsmacked for several seconds at the panting girl in front of her, then started to chuckle heartily. "Toga Himiko, you are a very amusing young woman, you know that?" In response, Himiko sputtered and leaned back. "Amusing? I'm not joking, Tanya. Yes, amusing because you got all worked up over this." Tanya went on to explain, pulling the offending ribbon from her pocket. "It's not even a gift. At least not one accepted happily. It's from Kayama Nomuri." Himiko's eyes narrowed as she repeated in a harsh whisper, "Kayama Nomuri, so that's the name of the one taking my senpai away." "Himiko, no," Tanya said sternly. "You will not try to attack a fellow heroine, especially when she's not even guilty of what you're accusing her of. It was merely me paying back a favor for her helping me this morning. My jacket had been torn last night during a fight, and she repaired it for me before classes started. In return, however, she asked me to wear this ribbon for the school day, and it would have been rude of me to refuse. That's all that happened." It was silent for a few seconds before Himiko asked in a surprisingly fragile voice. "Really?" "Yes, really," Tanya assured with a lopsided smile, causing the other girl to lunge forward to hug her, once more crying onto her shoulder. "Really, Himiko?" Tanya whispered as she resumed rubbing up and down the girl's back. "I can't believe you'd think I'd abandon my kohai so easily." "I'm sorry, senpai," the distraught girl whimpered with a little hiccup. "I just saw the pictures and got so jealous. It was like my heart melted and burned down into my stomach. I thought someone was taking away the only good thing in my life. Come on now, there's no need for dramatics. I'm sure I am not the only good thing." Tanya felt the head in the crook of her neck shake. "You are? Well, what about raspberry sorbet?" There was a snort and giggle, then a reply of, "Not funny." "That's right." Tanya agreed with a nod. "I am not funny, and don't you forget it. Now come on, stand up and let's go make ourselves presentable. We both look utterly unprofessional right now." "All right. Were you about to take a shower?" "I was, yes." "Can I join you?" "No, Himiko. That would be indecent. But we showered together at the HPSC gym 3 times, and you failed to keep your hands to yourself those 3 times, and so now we shower separately. Also, we are in a private setting, so it is generally less socially acceptable," she lectured. Honestly, Himiko was lucky that she had Tanya as her partner, because other people would be far less willing to ignore being groped while washing themselves. They could even get the impression that Toga had tried to initiate something sexual, which was frankly ridiculous if you knew the overexcited girl any better. Tanya was sure that it was all fun and games to her due to her uncaring nature concerning any social boundaries. It would be a surprise to Argent if her young ward even really knew what love was beyond the dictionary definition. But what if I promised to keep my hands to myself this time? In a shower that has barely more than 100 centimeters squared in floor space? I find that unlikely, but you're super small. We can fit in easily. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that, and the answer is still no. But you can have your turn first so you won't have to worry about running out of hot water. It'll give me time to make us something to eat anyway. You're too good to me, senpai. I'm starting to believe so, yes. Now hurry up and go. Senpai? Tomorrow morning, before you go to your teaching job, can you let me do your makeup? I don't wear makeup. Please. I promise I won't make you even more super adorable and cute than you already are. It'll be professional. I've learned a bunch about makeup to accentuate my disguises. The HPSC even hired real makeup artists to give me lessons, so I can make you look mature and serious and even more appealing all at once. I don't know. Please, 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 whined the girl, pouting in a way that made it impossible for Tanya to resist. Why did she have to look like a fluffy kitten at times? All right, fine. I'll wear the makeup. Damn it. She was becoming soft. I'll show that Nemuri lady how to really make Tanya-sama pretty. What was that, Himiko? Nothing, senpai. I'm hopping into the shower now. Tanya stared with narrowed eyes in the direction her subordinate had skipped off before shaking her head and returning her attention to the near-barren fridge. Looks like they would be having stir-fried vegetables and glasses of milk for dinner tonight. Maybe they could head down to the bakery a couple blocks away for dessert. For Himiko's sake, of course, since the girl did have a stressful day and could use it. Tanya was certainly glad that her third puberty had all but run its course so she didn't have to deal with things like mood swings and hormones trying to make her irrational. She was a paragon of rationality and emotional control, she thought as she put on the Kiss the Cutie apron and tied it behind her back. After all, making her partner happy was one of the most important and satisfying activities in her new life. While Tanya still didn't like the feeling of wearing makeup, it was making her subordinate smile, so it was worth it. Himiko also masterfully hid the bags under her eyes from her lack of sleep today, which was a plus. She was not normally a nighttime hero, because the commission wanted her to be visible, but the abrupt relocation towards Mustafu had required her to take the understaffed and unpopular patrol routes early in the morning. Crime rates here were thankfully low due to All Might's presence in the area. And done, chirped the excited vampire in front of her, finishing the last brush stroke of her eyeliner. Himiko held a small mirror up to show Tanya her face, grinning proudly as if she was unveiling the Mona Lisa itself. Upon inspection, Tanya noted with relief that she looked indeed surprisingly decent. Himiko's talent in changing one's appearance through minimalistic techniques was apparent, despite how subtle the changes were that she made. Look how gorgeous you are. I mean, normally you look extremely good too, but today you look extra good. Thanks, Himiko, she weakly smiled. No problem, senpai. I will gladly do it again whenever you want. It makes you look even more professional, you know? When you need to entertain these stupid media vultures again, then they wouldn't be able to utter a single word at seeing how cute you are. They'd be rendered speechless by your perfection. Tanya's smile grew larger at hearing the ridiculous plan that the overenergetic girl laid out. One could never be too sure if Himiko was serious about such things or if she was playing into the role she had created for herself, but Tanya found it amusing either way. No, that would be bad. I need my publicity to stay high in the hero rankings. I also don't want to be known for my beauty, but for my actual competence. You know what I think of heroes like Uwabami or MT Lady? They are useless dolls that nobody would care about if they didn't make their fans too horny to think clearly. Himiko droned on, in a tone that made it clear she had heard that particular argument a dozen times already. Exactly. Although I wouldn't mind seeing you in a skin-tight suit. What was that? Nothing. Anyways, I have to go now. School starts in an hour. Yeah? Her ward replied dejectedly. Then as an afterthought to lift her mood she added, "Thank you for making me so pretty, Himiko." The girl beamed back at her so brightly that she nearly went blind. "How adorable! Hashtag. Yes, I know that is 2 minutes before the start of class, but please sit down in an orderly fashion and remain silent. I spoke with Mr. Toshinori today and he assured me that All Might would indeed be coming back today. So please show the appropriate amount of respect for the man who got wounded in his line of duty to save your lives." "Yes, Miss Argent," answered the class as one. Silence lay heavily over the classroom as every student had their eyes trained on the door, waiting for any kind of movement. 1 minute ticked by, then the next. And the next. The pointer of the clock crawled with an agonizing lack of haste over the painted numbers at the wall, slowly but surely filling everybody with restless energy. Each passing minute made Tanya's glare turn colder and colder, making some of the students wonder why the door had not been frosted over yet. Nonetheless did she continue to sit motionlessly, save for the soft rise and fall of her chest as she observed the entryway. Some students had begun to lay their heads on their tables in hopes of catching a few minutes of sleep. Others discreetly used their mobile phones to entertain themselves. All of them, however, instinctively knew not to make a single sound, lest they drew the attention of their balefully staring teacher. It seemed as if the entire lesson was doomed to be wasted in quiet boredom. Until, "I am here," coming through the door again like a normal person. "You are late. Sorry. The printer was stuck. Anyways, who of you is pumped for another practical exercise? We are not going to do that. Young Tanya dash. That is Ms. Degurchaf to you. Didn't you read the lesson plan I sent to Mr. Toshinori?" "Of course I did. I just thought it would be better to dash. I cleared that plan with Principal Nedu. If you have complaints about how this class is run or what is taught here, then I suggest you take your issue to him. I understand that you must be confused after your brief absence, and we are both in our first year of teaching, so such mistakes are completely understandable. Just relax and let me handle this." Of course, young Tanya. I am in your capable hands." In an instant her posture relaxed and with an almost pleasant smile on her face she forcefully cheered, "Now everyone, please give a warm welcome for the number 1 hero." Hashtag. Isuku had never been this baffled before. Well, maybe when he got the confirmation that he had actually been accepted into UA. That had also been pretty surprising, considering that he had gotten exactly 0 combat points in the entrance exam. But seeing All Might getting so casually bossed around for the remainder of the period took the cake. Was Ms. Degurchaf mad at him? Well, he had wasted more than half an hour of their collective time, but he was also All Might. He must have had a valid reason. A mere printer couldn't stop him, right? She made him sit in the corner for the purpose of giving her feedback on her pedagogic skills, but he had the sneaking suspicion that she wanted him out of the way as much as possible. When All Might finally spoke up to contribute to the lesson, she coolly brushed him off and made him hand out the worksheets she brought, only to find out that she had accidentally printed out too few of them, so he had to get more. By the time he was back the period was over and Ms. Degurchaf seemed not the least bit sad about that fact. Oh no, what if she hated him now? As ridiculous as that statement was, there were apparently people out there who didn't like All Might very much, and she seemed to be one of them. That could be disastrous. The tension between two teachers managing the same class would only make things worse for everybody. He really wanted two of his favorite idols to get along. Perhaps he could apologize on his mentor's behalf? Would that improve or worsen the relationship between the two heroes? In his mind it was worth a try at least. Hesitantly he approached her desk while the rest of his classmates packed their belongings. Ms. Argent, do you have a minute? Ah, Midoriya. Perfect timing actually. I was just about to ask you something. What would that be? You are a pretty observant kid. I have not looked into any of your notebooks that you carry around, but if even half the stuff you mutter ends up there, then they are probably filled to the brim with useful information. If I were to remain in this role here at UA a while longer, then I would make it a mandatory assignment for all of you to write down their observations. Why, you know about MI and notebooks? He stuttered, embarrassed. She raised a perfectly coiffed eyebrow. How could anyone not notice your notorious scribbling? You should hide that better if you don't want to be found out then. But enough of that. Do you know who created these pictures? They have caused quite a bit of trouble for me. Ms. Degurchaf held up her phone and swiped through multiple photos depicting her with special focus on the blue ribbon she had worn yesterday. Think I teated one of those? Sorry. Why? I thought would be interesting for other people to see a more playful side of you. With all due respect, but you are so serious all the time. And not that there is an issue with that. You are a teacher and a respected pro hero, so you should not constantly be silly if that is not part of your image, like in the case of Ms. Joke or Present Mike. Those two use humor to lighten the mood and bring hope to distraught civilians as well as Dash. Tanya cleared her throat loudly, interrupting his monologue. I uploaded it to HeroNet because I believed it would be nice to humanize you more in the public eye. Seeing the ever-professional 11th Goddess break character so much could be inspiring. Sorry. I am being stupid again. No. That is a far better reasoning than I expected. It was nonetheless thoughtless of you to openly post a picture of me. Can you tell me why? I'm sorry, Sensei. Is it because you were not in public? I mean, pros get photographed all the time, but that is when they are out and about doing their job. When they show their face openly, then they're basically consenting to having their picture taken. But you, Ms. Argent, are off hero duty right now in the classroom, so that same ambiguous consent to be photographed is not present. I am impressed, Midoriya. You have repeatedly demonstrated that you can overcome your speech impairment with some determination. But yes, what you deduced is part of the reason. Still, you should really know better than to release sensitive information like the inside of the school building or who your teachers are. UA has already been targeted by villains, no need to make it worse when they attack you the next time. The next time? He squeaked, now being painfully reminded of the USJ incident again. Of course, they couldn't accomplish their goals last time, so they will try again. Now, back to the topic at hand. Hurriedly, he composed himself, pushing the ghastly image of his broken and bleeding teacher out of his mind and taking a deep breath like Hound Dog had taught him. Should I take it down? The photo, I mean. No, don't bother. It will have spread by now, which would make deleting the source useless. Although, she searched something on her phone before showing him a social media page. It was titled, The Palace of Pleasure from Anonymous Grape 69 and was filled with suggestive imagery that tested the limits of what was legal on the site. One of the newer posts was another photo of Ms. Degurchaf, but in a side profile that was centered on her bust. An obnoxious red arrow pointed at her hair ornament. The caption read, "See, even our hard-ass teacher tries to look nice sometimes. There's no excuse, girls." Who is the culprit behind this obscenity? The image ID confirms that it was first uploaded here, and I want to know who did it. Maybe. I am unsure. But I think it could be Mineta. He has this whole grape motif going on. That is what his costume is supposed to represent. Yes. The pea pants symbolize a bowl. At least he said so last week. I thought it was just an elaborate crotch protection. Not an unwise choice considering how many times he must have been kicked there if he has always been this perverse. Isuku nearly choked. Suddenly the heroine raised her voice, clearly addressing the whole room. I nearly forgot to tell you, but here at the best hero school in the country we cannot waste time on doing nothing, especially with the sports festival taking place soon. So for all of you who value your education, I will arrange an extra session after the end of lessons today. Then he could perhaps finally show All Might the progress in his training. His mom had not let him out of the house during the weekend, which meant that he couldn't meet with his mentor. Of course he had texted him some of the stuff he found out about All for One, but he had kept the biggest breakthrough a secret to surprise him. Izuku only felt a little guilty about that, because he knew All Might would be proud. Hopefully. Oh man, I wanted to go to the cinema later. His excitement was obviously not shared among the others. Yeah, my mom baked pie today. It's gonna be cold by then, whined Kaminari. If your education is less important to you than pie, I will not stop you from leaving. You just shouldn't be surprised to find that you are no longer a member of the hero course if your performance at the sports festival is not satisfactory. Kaken smirked for some reason and looked at him. What was that supposed to mean? And Mineta, I have seen your questionable online activities. Go to Hound Dog's office immediately and give him this note. I will know if you don't. But I am just appreciative of the female form. That is free speech and there is nothing wrong with that. It went wrong the moment you photoshopped my head onto Midnight's body. Get out. Isuku was unsure if his disgust outweighed his amusement at that moment. ##. The only reason why Mina didn't try to catch a picture of how beautiful her teacher looked was the talk she had given to Midoriya a few hours ago. She wasn't a stalker or anything creepy like that, but she wanted to analyze what kind of makeup Argent was wearing. And more importantly, she wanted to discuss with her friends who she was wearing it for. Who could this special person be? Clearly Ms. Degergenschaft, no Degerschaft? Dega whatever. Her name was so difficult to pronounce. Mina decided that from this point onward she would just call her teacher Tanya in her head, although she wouldn't dare to say that out loud. The verbal lashing the diminutive young woman had given all might for that had been enough to convince her that acting so informal around her would be a terrible idea. Anyways, before she had been distracted by the impossible spelling of Argent's family name, she had been thinking about Tanya's love interest. No interview that she remembered had talked about Argent's relationship status, but in Mina's mind there were only a few possible candidates. First the bright blue ribbon yesterday and now the elaborate makeup during school hours. Either Tanya was seeing her mysterious lover on UA grounds or shortly after leaving them. Mina, however, firmly believed that the reserved and pragmatic Argent would not fall for anyone in the faculty so quickly. Someone who appeared so guarded needed months of gentle prodding and romantic gestures to open up, at least if her novels were to be trusted. Instead it had to be someone she knew for a longer period of time. The acidic girl loved the childhood friends to lovers trope. Someone who had also come to this region not too long ago. Someone who was both charismatic and strong enough to woo Tanya's heart. It could be no other than Mina knocked against the wall to imitate a dramatic drum roll. Hawks. What smiling about? Asked her new friend Sue. Mina looked around to verify that her teacher was not nearby and conspiratorially whispered to the frog girl, I think Miss Argent is in love with Hawks. What gave you the idea? Ribbit? It makes perfect sense. Both work directly under the HPSC so they are guaranteed to know each other, both are incredibly strong and, come on. Isn't it obvious? Hawks comes here for a charity event, has to stay because UA expressed security concerns and then through pure coincidence Argent accepts the teaching position here immediately. They have to be secretly together. Put it like that? Who is together? Asked a cheerful Ochako who had apparently just finished putting on her gym clothes in the changing room. Argent and Hawks. Ribbit, replied Sue in her typically blunt fashion. Wait, really? Yeah, they are such a cute couple. How do you know that though? Like I said, it can be a coincidence that they moved simultaneously to a new city and I bet they have lots of experience working together. Also, that cute ribbon that she was wearing yesterday? Do you honestly think she would have put that on if it wasn't a gift from someone precious to her? And today she is wearing, like, super awesome makeup that lets her look more mature. All I'm saying is that my date senses are tingling. Your date senses? Deadpanned Ochako incredulously. They let me feel whenever two young people are about to go out on a romantic date. I am rarely wrong about that kind of stuff. Mina would have continued to present more evidence for her case if the object of their discussion had not chosen to appear. Are that all of you? Today we are fighting uphill battles. Does anybody want to guess what that means? Zero. Of course we are going to fight on uneven terrain. On a slope most likely. Incorrect. Yayorozu? I believe you meant it less literally and more metaphorically, Ms. Degerschaft. That was how it was supposed to be pronounced, Mina noted with interest. We are going to fight against an opponent significantly stronger than us, the rich girl continued. Indeed. You will spar with one opponent and the same safety rules apply as always. One of you will not be allowed to use their quirk while the other does. Within reason, of course. Any unnecessary injuries will get you detention. Understood? Yes, Ms. Argent. Because Mineta is still with Hound Dog, the number of partners is uneven. Tanya theatrically grabbed her chin in mock thought. Kaminari, I see you have not abandoned your class for the temptation of baked goods. You are fighting against me. The spar lasts until you can't move anymore or I call it quits. Understood? Why me? He mumbled under his breath, but Ms. Argent still heard him. Because why not? After all, yesterday you were still of the opinion that I was, quote-unquote, trying to impress a guy, no? Why don't you impress me instead? But sensei, you are the number 11 hero. How am I going to prevail against your quirk? Who said that I would be using my quirk? This is supposed to be an uphill battle for you, not an unwinnable scenario. Use whatever you feel like. I even am going to limit myself by not moving my arms from behind my back at all and keeping my eyes closed. There is no way. Yes, there is. Now come on. This is supposed to be nearly one-sided. With a battle cry, Kaminari leapt into action, throwing his sparking fist towards the unmoving hero. Everybody watched with bated breath as he put all his power into a single attack to incapacitate their blind and seemingly defenseless teacher. Needless to say, he stood no chance. Tanya had spoken the truth. It had been one-sided. Kirishima Ijiro stood at attention, back straight and arms at his side as Tanya looked him up and down. Honestly, she rather liked the boy as he reminded her of some of her more boisterous soldiers from her previous life. Diligent, determined, and with a fire in his heart that refused to be smothered. At least, that was what she gathered from her interactions with him so far, and if she was even remotely accurate in her assessment, then he would flourish most under her special brand of training just as her precious 203rd did. And if she was wrong? Well, it would be nothing Recovery Girl and Hound Dog couldn't fix, she was sure. Kaminari's largest wound had also been that to his pride. So, you wish to be a shield, do you? She asked as she circled him, getting the boy to nod once, gaze focused straight ahead. Yes, sensei. I want to be a wall that will never fall. A shield for people to stand behind. Heh, a mobile bunker, she mused with a smirk. I could see the appeal. The smirk quickly turned into a hard frown as she continued. However, a bunker must be sturdy, so as to not collapse upon those it's meant to protect in their most dire hour. Your hardening will help in that, but it's not enough, not yet and not on its own. She stopped in front of him and snapped her fingers, causing two large robots to whirl up, each holding a bakken. Tell me, Kirishima, have you ever heard of Kongoken? I don't think so, he answered honestly, eyeing the two UA-provided robots wearily. It's a martial practice in Kung Fu, sometimes referred to as the Iron Shirt. It's a routine of intense training used to build up one's durability, she explained. This is achieved through subjecting the body to increasingly extreme forms of punishment. She gestured to her robotic companions. The first stage of which is enduring the strikes of wooden swords repeatedly across the body. I believe these machines would be more effective than one of your classmates wailing on you. He grinned at that. Is that all? That's easy, he said as he began to harden his body. The process was halted though, when Tanya harshly yelled, No. You will not be using your quirk for this. At least, not at first. This caused the boy to blink, confusion clear on his face. No quirk? What? I mean, I'll be using my quirk in real fights as a hero, right? That's true, she agreed. But I know stamina is an issue in your hardening, both in merely maintaining it over extended periods, and doing so under continued assault. Out on the field, there's no telling what sort of scenarios you might encounter, but prolonged battles, especially if they end up being against multiple opponents or consecutive fights, aren't out of the question. In which case, you will either want to reserve your quirk usage to defend against certain attacks or powerful adversaries, or extend your time limit over the course of the situation. That's why we're beginning a new type of training today. She slapped a palm onto the man-sized robot to her left as she explained. You are going to put up your guard, tense your muscles, and let Beam 12 and Siege 13 hit you repeatedly with their bakken until you can't take it anymore. Then you will go to the nurse for healing and return to repeat the process. Recovery Girl has agreed to do this one time per training session and once again before you return home, provided you let her perform post-training examinations and follow a diet plan meant to replenish what her quirk will take out of you. That sounds pretty intense. He mumbled, gulping as sweat started to form on his brow. Tanya quirked a brow. Too much for you? Here I thought you took the school's motto of plus ultra seriously. Eijiro shook his head and stood straight and proud once more, eyes steely as he glared at the two robots in challenge. You're right. It'd be totally unmanly of me to back down now after I asked you to come up with a training plan for me. Tanya smiled and nodded approvingly. Just so, she agreed. And after you grow accustomed to the sticks, we'll move on to iron chains, then steel bats, and finally cannonballs. Recovery girl, and I also theorize that this training will translate to an improvement in your quirk as well, which she'll be keeping an eye out for during her examinations. Once you can withstand that level of punishment with your unaltered body, we can begin proper quirk training with a zero-pointer. With her eyes turned to the ceiling and hand on her chin as she said this, she didn't see Eijiro's face grow increasingly pale. Anyway, there is no better time to start than right now. Put up your guard, Kirishima. B12, Siege 13, Initiate Training Routine 203. With pleasure, B12 said in a tinny voice as Siege 13 bounced its sword eagerly against its metal palm, both approaching the red-haired boy as he took a hesitant step back. He only just barely had time to put up his guard before the strikes came raining down. Turning away, Tanya scanned the gym for the next student in need of her help. She frowned upon noticing that the majority of them had stopped dueling for some reason to instead stare wide-eyed in her direction. Ignoring the sound of wood impacting flesh and the pained grunts from behind her, Tanya yelled, "What are you doing? Get back to work. Koda, come over here. Don't think I haven't noticed you refusing to fight back against your sparring partners. You're not only hindering your own training, but your partners as well. If you're so worried about hurting someone, then I'll be your opponent. Rest assured, you won't have to worry about hurting me, and I won't allow you to pull any punches or else." His frightened glance in the direction of Kirishima, who had already passed out again, told more than words ever could. Although the first half of the exercise had been carried out quirkless, oh the memories. Izuku had more than enough time to practice his quirk later on. All Might's time limit had decreased again as a result of his wound from the USJ incident, which left him not enough time to visit the gym in his muscle form to watch him train. Still, the opportunity to show off a bit for his idol made him giddy. With his mentor steadily growing weaker, he needed to push himself harder than ever before to become worthy of All Might's legacy. He swallowed nervously at the mere thought of becoming the next symbol of peace, but he owed it to his mother, to his friends, no, the whole world to try his best at fulfilling that role. The nasty voice of his inner doubts reminded him that he would never be able to live up to the greatness of his mentor, that he was useless, unworthy, just a deku. And oh, he screamed mentally, clamping down on those thoughts of inferiority that had been drilled into his head since his 4th birthday. Even though he had told some of his experiences to Ochako and his mom, letting out absolutely everything out in front of Hound Dog had been incredibly relieving. It had taken multiple hours until he could properly open up about that topic, but it had been worth it. Of course, Izuku couldn't tell the counselor everything, because the existence of One for All was a secret, but the weight of the mistreatment that he had suffered for most of his life had been lightened just enough to make him feel like he was starting life all over again. Hound Dog had also shown him how to meditate, to calm his center, whatever that really meant. When he was worried or stressed, it still took him a while to clear his mind and focus on the here and now, but he was getting better at it. Izuku hoped that it would help with his control over One for All, and he liked to believe that it worked to a certain extent. That was also what he was currently doing to prepare for using his quirk. Now was the time to test if his quirk counseling had been a success. His breathing slowed, his mind emptied of doubts, and his veins began to thrum with power. Izuku opened his eyes and grinned up at the skeletal form of his favorite hero. "I can channel it through my entire body." Green lighting danced over his skin, but it did not hurt him. "Very impressive, young Midoriya," replied All Might with a similar smile. "Remember how I told you that my body is like an egg in the microwave oven?" The number 1 hero cringed at the terrible comparison. "Well, I think I got the perfect power setting down. Now the egg doesn't explode anymore. Although I still haven't punched anything, so I don't know if it really works. Would the egg explode if I dash?" "Young Midoriya, please never talk about exploding again," said his mentor sternly. "Why yes, all Mr. Yagi." They were not completely alone, so he needed to make sure to only address him in his civilian name, lest the secret of All Might's muscle form be discovered. How much of your quirk can you safely use so far? Like I said, I didn't test it. I only tried to manifest as much of the quirk as I can handle. Like dragging something from the depths of the ocean to the surface without suffocating. Your metaphors should really be centered less around you dying. I guess. I can't say for sure, but when the lightning appears like it does right now, it feels as if I am calling upon maybe 3 to 5% of the total power. Very good. Very good, young Midoriya. Do you want to see how your technique holds up on the field of battle? Why are you saying this so seriously? Come on. Stand up. Punch this sandbag with as much force as you think you can handle. Let your heroic desire become your strength. Izuku gathered the small trickle of overwhelming power inside him and tried to disperse it throughout his whole body as he had been instructed to do. His vision shrank as he focused solely on his target, doing his hardest to keep the egg from cracking. I call this minor smash. Nobody could tell if Mr. Yagi was coughing from laughter or because he had gotten sand in his mouth after the bag detonated. Nonetheless, it was obvious that he was proud of Izuku's achievement. Even Recovery Girl was pleasantly surprised when she had to heal only 2 hairline fractures. Kaminari Denki stared at the case held up to him as if it was going to explode, then at his blonde teacher like she was a rabid ferret ready to attack. Take it, Kaminari, and open it? Tanya repeated impatiently, eyes narrowing a millimeter, which had the boy scrambling to follow her command post-haste. Yes, ma'am. He yelped as he opened the case, only to stall as he stared inside. What is this? Support gear. Power Loader was willing to whip up a prototype based on the functionality I described to him, she explained. Tanya had been lucky that she was able to convince Power Loader to create the weapon at such short notice. All it had cost her was a signed autograph for his niece, who was apparently her biggest fan. The propaganda network of the HPSC was unreasonably effective if they could boost her popularity so much, despite her just doing her job properly. Okay, I get that. I guess, but why does it look like a weird gun? Because it is in fact a weird gun, though for legal reasons, I suggest we continue calling it a support item. Denki looked from her to the strange device in the box, tentatively taking it out and setting the case on the floor beside him. You're giving me a gun? He asked incredulously. Yes, because our spar a few days ago showcased for me how cumbersome your quirk can be in certain circumstances, she explained. Using it at too high wattage impairs your mental faculties, and you're liable to shock an ally if they happen to be too close. It also lacks effective range, which this will rectify nicely. By shooting people? He said skeptically. Why not just become a police officer instead? Because this weapon does not use gunpowder as an ammunition propellant, instead operating through the use of a strong electromagnetic pulse to fire bullets, which your quirk will generate. As she explained this, she began pointing out some of the features in the pistol-like weapon in the boy's hand. By eliminating the need for brass casings, the magazine is able to hold 20 rounds, and the lack of an onboard power source aids in the compact form even more. Also, as it's powered by your quirk, muzzle velocity can be adjusted situationally by you, allowing for both subsonic and supersonic rounds which would normally not be feasible for small arms. In fact, on the lowest end, the bullets are hardly lethal at all, which makes it a fine piece of support gear for taking in villains alive. Honestly, for a prototype, it's a rather robust weapon already. Power Loader outdid himself. He even provided a nice thigh holster for you. Denki stared down at the small pistol in a new light, a smile pulling at his lips as he looked back up at her. When he did, however, the smile faded. I don't get it. Why would you do something like this for me? Tanya tilted her head. I don't understand what you mean. Well, it's just, don't you hate me? He asked awkwardly, looking away. Like, that spar yesterday was just an excuse to kick my butt and embarrass me in front of the class, right? I mean, I know that stuff with the picture was out of line, and I get that, but I don't hate you. Tanya interrupted. Don't like your lackadaisical attitude towards your heroic studies, and perhaps I was upset about the photo, but that's in the past. It is my job as your teacher to correct your behavior and, among other things, instill in you the appropriate attitudes to become an effective hero. I don't expect you to be the perfect hero or even student right now, but I do expect you to improve with time, and for you not to waste my efforts on you." She tilted her head and asked quietly, "Are you a wasted effort, Kaminari?" He stared, mouth slightly agape, before his eyes became moist and he shook his head. "No, sensei. And thank you. I promise I'll be better from now on." She smiled fondly at the boy, but smoothed her expression when he refocused his attention on her. "Good," she said. "I hope you strive not to waste your new instructor's time either." New instructor? Of course, I'm certainly not fit to teach you how to use that. After all, I don't use guns," Tanya said with a shrug, and it was the truth in most ways. She'd hardly used a gun in this new life, relying almost entirely on her quirk for her public operations. Even in her previous life, she wasn't so arrogant as to claim she was a sharpshooter. No, the man approaching them was far more qualified than her. "Howdy," Snipe greeted, tilting the brim of his Stetson at them when he came to a stop beside Tanya. "So the lil lady here wants me to teach you how to use that little pea shooter, that right?" "Indeed," Tanya confirmed, holding a hand towards her student. "This is Kaminari Denki, and I think he has much to learn from you, sir. Not just in how to utilize his new tool in the context of heroics, but also in managing his image while doing so. After all, the fact that you have become such a well-respected hero in Japan, a country known for its very reserved views towards firearms, is a testament to your PR skills." The much taller hero looked away, scratching the side of his gas mask-covered face as he muttered, "Well shoot, I already agreed to teach the kid. There's no need for flattery, miss." "There isn't," Tanya agreed. "I am only speaking the truth. Now, Kaminari, I know you're probably eager to try out your new equipment, but I suggest you first read the instruction manual power loader provided so as to not risk blowing your fingers off." "Yes, Miss Degurchaf," he nearly yelled before turning bodily towards Snipe and bowing at the waist towards the man in a show of respect Tanya had not seen from the boy yet. "And thank you, Snipe-sensei. I promise to take this training seriously and to not waste your time." "Thanks, I guess. Now come on, kid. The shooting range is on the opposite side of campus, and we're burning daylight as it is." "Yes, sensei," Denki said as he grabbed the case and hurried after his new tutor. And so, Tanya watched the pair leave with a small smile and new hope for the boy's future. Now if she could only figure out how to correct Mineta Minoru's deviant behavior without flinging the little Hound Dog into orbit. Maybe she could brainstorm with Himiko to come up with something. Her partner had a wondrous ability to make people do her bidding even before she showed them her knife collection. ###. Meanwhile, Himiko was going over the mission plan that had been sent to her through the encrypted network of the HPSC Special Operations Unit. Her infiltration of the League of Villains had gone off without a hitch. She had created somewhat of a name for herself in the criminal underworld by murdering countless people either directly or falsely claiming responsibility for their demise. It was not work that she actually enjoyed, but nobody would notice that when she wore her trademark smile wherever she went. There was only one person in this whole, wide world that was able to detect the sorrow and disgust beneath her mask. She was the personal son of Himiko's life, her sole star in the bleak darkness that otherwise threatened to swallow her up. Yet this source of comfort and affection was bound by the same chains as she was. Neither of them was free from the iron-hard grip of the HPSC. These pigs forced them to do their bidding, to bloody their hands so that this rotten society could decay just a bit longer. It was abhorrent how corrupt these men in fine suits and their lapdog heroes in motley costumes had become. She would kill them all if she could, but she couldn't. Not when it would put her love at risk. For her savior she would endure. So Himiko had taken on the role of a villain in order to blend in with the rest of the lowlifes that housed in this city. Like a good little soldier, she followed the demands of the pigs that held her chains and carved the name Blood Dancer into the fearful hearts of villain scum. She shuddered to think that she could have become a hopeless bottom feeder if her love hadn't saved her. Hanging out in bars and flirting with stinky, drunk men was so not cute. Regardless, her infamy had spread wide and multiple organizations had tried to hook her already with empty promises. Only one of them had been the one she was allowed to accept, the League of Villains. A band of clueless psychopaths without restraint or intelligence or cuteness. Worthless. However, her orders said that she had to get close to them, so she played her usual game and enticed them with her body and her combat prowess. The alleged leader was a man-child who only acknowledged her as a human being because she defeated him in a match of Mortal Kombat 32. That made her his favorite NPC, and he started to even listen to her suggestions from time to time. His pride had been hurt badly by his failure to kill anyone at the USJ, which had made it child's play to goad Shigaraki into immediately seeking revenge. He promptly sent her on a mission to break into that high-level dungeon to steal the safety codes that would let them bypass the automated security to the sports festival. It was stupid, childish, and ridiculously dangerous, but he did not appear to care. Shigaraki's babysitter, a misty bartender that gave off uncomfortable vibes, attempted to dissuade him from the terrible plan, but the hand-loving moron was having none of it. All it had taken on Himiko's part was to self-assuredly declare that she could accomplish any mission without backup or die trying. For a second she felt pity for whoever was the real leader of this nonsensical organization. Who needed enemies with such subordinates? Why the pigs wanted her to instigate a villain attack during the UA Sports Festival of all places was beyond her. Did they want to weaken the school's reputation? Or strengthen it? At the end of the day it was unimportant. The whole world could burn as long as she was together with her senpai. Now she was reading over her final instructions before the plan could commence. Protocol 21749B was rather simple. Himiko would receive the package with the blood of Aizawa Shoyuta, commonly known as the underground hero Eraserhead, 6 hours before the launch of the operation. The life fluid had been channeled off from the regular blood tests that the man underwent by an insider in the hospital, who soon after would be found as the unfortunate victim of a memory loss quirk which made him forget the last 2 weeks of his life. It was a clean, humane, and effective way to wrap up a loose end that could potentially turn into a liability later down the road. Himiko, or as the documents called her, Carmilla, would ingest that blood 2 hours before school started and exit the hospital with Aizawa's face. Quirk could not replicate physical injuries, so she needed to get her disguise of bandages and plaster casts right. The videos of Eraserhead's body language and typical mannerisms that had been attached to his dossier were all blurry and short, so she needed to make up most of his behavior on the spot. Oh well, the extra challenge would make it more fun. Not to mention the chance to tease Tanya a bit in her new form. The cute faces she would make were going to be hilarious. ##. Tanya let out a deep breath as she closed the door to her apartment behind her and finally took the time to check her phone. Her newest post on HeroNet about social equality was blowing up, which was nice to see. Apart from that, nobody else had sent her anything of importance. Just the usual spam of marketing deals and requests for interviews. Nothing that her automatic reply system could not deal with. Then she pulled out her special, unofficial, untraceable, and most importantly secret phone from a hidden pocket and checked that too. Despite being as technologically secure as humanly possible, the HPSC did not like to send compromising data through their network often. The reason had been something about emerging technomancy quirks, but Tanya could not care less. So it came as a surprise to find a new message in her inbox. Do not be alarmed by a familiar face. More commands coming soon. She read the text again and subsequently deleted it from the device to leave no trace. This was most likely a no-only-way-have-to case. There was no other reason for this instruction to be so vague and cryptic otherwise. Possessing mission-critical information could be dangerous, especially when dealing with mind-reading quirks or similarly frustrating abilities. But still, was she in danger? Probably not, seeing as she was supposed to not be alarmed. Also, why had the word face been highlighted? This whole scenario was fishy. Furthermore, now that she thought about it, Himiko had been acting strange over the last few days, behaving more clingy and moody than usual. Did she know what was up? Tanya did not want to be dragged into this mess. If a conflict of some sort arose, then staying at UA should be her safest bet. From what she could tell, the security had been amped up considerably. Cameras and motion detectors in the hallways were everywhere. With over a dozen pro heroes on site, Tanya was sure that the HPSC was not crazy enough to cause a fight near the school grounds. Those spineless paper pushers would not dare to upset the smartest being on the planet. She sighed again. I am not going to get involved. If they call me in, I'll just claim that my school work required me to stay there or risk breaking cover. I have a flawless record. I deserve some rest, damn it. Tanya angrily muttered to herself. Damn you being X for giving me this much power. Once again she wondered how her third life could have gone differently if she had been born with an ordinary, plain, weak quirk. Instead she had been gifted with near limitless potential and was chained to an organization that used her however they saw fit. A nostalgic experience, one could say. Her quirk worked in a variety of ways, some of which were not unlike the magic of her last life. Officially it was registered as light walls, but as it was often the case, this entailed far more than what the name would suggest. In its most basic form, Tanya could form shields of translucent, silver-shimmering energy which had given her the moniker Argent. They were resistant even against excessive force and could cover more than a football field with their surface area. She could manipulate certain properties of these barriers like their shape, position, opacity, or permeability. By applying a force field around her feet and torso, she could fly through the air, although in reality she was just pushing herself with a nearly invisible platform of sorts whose position she altered along a calculated vector. The greater these changes, the more focus energy this took out of her though. For example, clouding a barrier so that normal sunlight could not pass through was far easier than manipulating it until no radiation of any kind could pierce it. Of course, this also applied to how big her shields could become. A 4,000 square meter force field required at least 4,000 times more stamina to maintain than a 1 square meter large one. Subsequently, it had taken her a nearly inhuman level of training to push herself to endure such strain. Nonetheless, that quirk made her ideal for crowd control or rescue work, because she could hold back either large amounts of people or debris. Separating protesters, supporting collapsing buildings, levitating wounded civilians, or utterly immobilizing criminals were all tasks she excelled at. No wonder that she had reached the top of the national hero rating charts so quickly, with the subtle help of the HPSC of course. However, should the force that pressed on her defenses exceed the capabilities of the shield, then it would collapse in rather painful fashion and she would be unable to erect another one for a few seconds afterwards. A substantial weakness that she covered by erecting multiple smaller barriers in a staggered fashion next to each other, so that if one failed it would not cause her whole support structure to collapse. As strong as her quirk was to fend off normal humans, normals did not exist in the world of the 24th century anymore. Mutant-type quirks often came with slight strength enhancements and/or spiky bits that could be used to concentrate kinetic energy into very small points. Anyone with a crowbar or an axe could also replicate this effect to smash through her defenses with comparative ease. It would still be hard to accomplish, but multiple villains working together could make short work of her barriers. Of course, she could limit her surface area and channel that energy into more powerful fields that could withstand those blows, but that would be merely delaying the inevitable. Tanya was not fond of focusing on pure defense if attacking could prove more far safer. After all, nothing was gained from committing resources to merely delay an enemy. Her second life had taught her the importance of mobility and overwhelming firepower to crush any opposition before they could really become a threat. Due to her barriers being constructs of pure energy, they had no physical mass or thickness, which made them excellent blades if she pumped enough power into them so that they could actually separate solid objects from another, which was not much. The downside of using her quirk as a weapon in this way was that it was simply too effective. The smallest amount of error on her part would bisect a man or at the very least lacerate important blood vessels. Humans were annoyingly fragile things, and she was not sure if even the Commission could save her from the public backlash of openly killing a villain. Tanya would rather not risk being labeled as a murderer, although that description would be more than accurate. Therefore, she resolved to only ever use Hertz Silver Slice technique in case of a catastrophic emergency. Far more applicable were Hertz Silver Wedge and Silver Bash. Whoever at the marketing department had come up with these stupid names should be fired for their apparent lack of imagination. It was an established part in modern hero culture to cry out the name of your attack like a moron before using it, so her handler had vehemently insisted for her to partake in this absurd ritual. Luckily, she only had to scream like a bad action hero when cameras were nearby. That silver wedge was technically also a blade, but 95% less lethal. As the name aptly described, it was a wedge, although the naked eye couldn't see that. Basically, two small shields were overlapping each other in a V-shaped form, creating a relatively dull edge compared to the practically two-dimensional silver slash. In reality, it still served as an extremely sharp knife or sword that she could control at will. Tanya's Silver Bash was the simplest of all weapons since the dawn of humanity, a club. She simply projected a small, hard force field over the head of her target and pressed down with enough force to knock them out. If it didn't work the first time, then repeated bonks on the head typically put most of her victims out of commission. Its effectiveness came from the fact that most people never bothered to look directly up if their eyes had not mutated to do so. Her range to use any of these attacks amounted to more or less exactly 40 meters in every direction, but Tanya was optimistic that she could expand that area with time and effort. Discipline and diligence had carried her this far already, so it stood to reason that they would carry her further. Quirks also had the chance to spontaneously evolve under stress, but that was pretty rare and not something she could rely on. Anyways, in Tanya's opinion, it was now time for more ice cream. She deserved it for the stress that was soon to come. Himiko hadn't messaged her in 2 days and Tanya was feeling restless. Of course she was not concerned. The girl could take care of herself. Nobody she had ever known was as dangerous as her partner in close combat situations. It filled her with immense satisfaction and gratefulness that she had managed to find Himiko on that fateful day and train her up to one of the finest agents the HPSC had seen to date. That was one of the few unambiguously good things that had happened to her in this life. Why then did she feel so empty? Probably the weather. Too much sunshine could also weigh down on one's mood, apparently. Once again she dressed herself for school. Although this time she chose a more civilian attire instead of her iconic hero costume. Today was the day that the first pros from neighboring districts were arriving to serve as extra security during the sports festival. That meant that she did not need to go on patrol, because all relevant areas of the city were already covered enough. For the next few days she would only need to serve in her role as teacher, not as a soldier. A downside she sadly failed to consider was that she was technically not allowed to use her quirk when outside her hero persona, which meant that she had to take the train to UA instead of flying there. It hurt her professional pride a bit that she had to run to the classroom in order to be on time, as that was a clear indication of time mismanagement, but at least she was not late. So in her hurry she did not even notice the dark figure hiding under her desk when she entered the classroom. ##. Shoto watched with interest as their normally perfectly prepared teacher rushed into the room. Well, to the untrained eye it might have looked like she was just casually walking in, but he could notice the subtle signs signifying her hurry. Her slightly disheveled hair, the marginally raised breathing rate, and her uncharacteristically late appearance mere seconds before the clock signaled the start of class. To Shoto, for whom interpreting such details could mean the difference between getting a good night's sleep or not being able to properly walk the next day, it was all too obvious. Good morning, 1A. Today will be our last official lesson together before the sports festival. If Mr. Aizawa has recovered enough by that point, he will be taking over your education again. I must say that I have enjoyed our shared time immensely, as short as it might be, and I hope that I could be of help to you aspiring heroes. So I wanted to say preemptively, thank you, spoke Argent. A shame. Although he still kind of resented her for forcing him to use the fire aspect of his quirk, he could also understand why she did it. It may seem cruel, but her teaching was much different from that of his sperm donor, if one could even call that teaching. She wanted to push him to be at his best, not for selfish reasons, but simply because she actually wanted to do her job. Ashido broke the ensuing silence by clearing her throat. Ms. Argent, couldn't you ask the principal to hire you for real? Yeah. That would be awesome, added Uraraka. Fools. As if the number 11 heroine would risk her position by further staying at UA. Perhaps she was different though. I do not want to slander Mr. Aizawa, for he has proven exceptionally brave in our defense at the USJ and our overall experience with his teaching methods is limited, but it would be a welcome change if you attempted to share the position of homeroom teacher with him. Ms. Argent, your dedication to our training has been commendable in every aspect, and your enthusiasm to support us in unexpected ways much closer aligns with the vision I had of UA when coming here. I believe I can speak for most if not all of us when I say that it would be terribly sad to see you leave. Ida started to drone on in his usual stuck-up fashion. Sure. What he said, yelled Kirishima. Why did they all have to be so loud? Screaming would not change anything. The shine of your appearance has been most dazzling, mon prof. Our little school will glow much less brilliantly without you, oui mademoiselle? One wave of her hand was enough to take back control of the room. Impressive. His bastard father would have needed to flare his disgusting quirk for a similar effect. It warms my heart that you think so, but it is not my decision. If the higher-ups are unwilling, then I am powerless to refuse them. He found it comical how some of his classmates' postures simultaneously deflated as if they were a hive mind. Nonetheless, I will try my best to present my case to them. After all, how could I refuse if you ask me so politely? She smiled lopsidedly. It was a nice smile. A small but real one. Idly, Shoto thought back to the last true smile he had gotten from his family. Suddenly a familiar dry voice rasped, "Well, isn't this sweet?" Argent's body briefly tensed as if she was expecting an attack before slowly turning to the podium where Eraserhead had seemingly appeared out of thin air. How the man had been hiding inside the cramped space with his giant plaster casts was a mystery beyond mortal comprehension. Welcome back, Mr. Aizawa. I was not aware that the hospital had released you yet. They haven't, he grumbled. Then why are you here? Surely you would know that aggravating your injuries will only lengthen your absence from your position as teacher. I'm not going to aggravate them. Anyways, that speech was very cute, but don't you think I have a say in this? Had he just said cute? Unironically? Of course. Naturally I will respect your opinion on the matter, but ultimately it is up to the principal to decide how this school is run. Eraserhead only grunted in reply, but remained silent. Both of them seemed to wait for the other to make a move until Ms. de Gurchaf broke the tension. If that was everything you wanted to say, then I must ask you to leave. I have a lesson to give and we certainly don't want to waste our students' time any longer, right? No. I'm going to watch. I want to see what is so praiseworthy about your teaching style that got the kids all excited. Argent nodded her head in contemplation and produced a translucent chair with a wave of her hand in the corner of the room. Wordlessly, the bandaged man limped over and cautiously sat down on the silvery construct. Hers was a powerful and extraordinarily versatile quirk. Too powerful, one could say. Just like with the Midoriya boy, Shoto had the feeling that there was more going on than simply good genetics. It was rather suspicious how someone with no personal information that his begetter's spies could dig up had already achieved the number 11 rank. The informants that Endeavor employed were all top tier, or else the bastard would have not managed to hide nearly as many scandals as he did. Was Ms. de Gurchaf also the product of a quirk marriage? A secret government experiment? The lesson continued. He felt neither bored nor particularly engaged by it, but that was how they were most of the time. At least it was better than math with ectoplasm. While taking notes, he observed Eraserhead from time to time. If Shoto had not known any better, then he could have sworn that Mr. Aizawa was eyeing their replacement teacher up. She seemed to be the sole focus of his gaze, roaming her body up and down, but never straying for too long from her shining, blue eyes. He reasoned that he was most likely wrong though, because the bandages around his head obscured much of his actual expression. So that concludes that particular topic. I am sorry that I had to overrun the time a bit, but it is important that you understand this particular subject. It will be the basis of much educational content in the future. If you have any more questions, please approach me now or in the teacher's lounge where I will be spending the next 5 to 7 hours. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Ms. Argent, he mumbled, but it was drowned out by the much more enthusiastic responses of his peers. They were all so noisy and emotional. It was incomprehensible to him how they could act so carefree. He would definitely not miss them when he got his license. Vaguely he could hear, A word please, from Eraserhead, but he was already halfway on his way to the door, wanting to get out of the classroom as quickly as possible. A wish that was promptly squashed by the large crowd of people outside who were nearly filling the gigantic hallway. Shoto clicked his tongue in annoyance. Hashtag, how can I help you, sir? It always paid to be respectful to veterans in the industry. You never knew what kinds of connections they had formed that could make her life harder in the future. Her strained relationship with present Mike was a prime example. Well, would you like some feedback on what I thought of your lesson? He asked. Tanya had been expecting something of that sort already. Despite how she felt about Aizawa from the bits of information she had been able to piece together, she also knew that Nedu would not have appointed him as homeroom teacher for the most prestigious class in Japan out of a whim. There had to be some hidden characteristic buried beneath his unprofessional laziness, and it would prove beneficial to find out what that was. Of course, I would be thankful for more criticism. I imagine that despite our different work philosophies, I could learn a lot from you. The erasure hero smirked underneath his bandages. For one, why are you not in costume? Shouldn't you demonstrate your presence as a hero in front of the kids? Not that I mind it. What was that? I do not think it is necessary to always wear my uniform in school. The children have already gotten used to it now, so I thought it would be a good idea to shake that up a little. There is something else you definitely need to change though. What is it? From the sound of it he sounded quite serious. Had she broken some unwritten rule? Was she in trouble? You need to stop being so damn cute. It's distracting. It took a full 3 seconds for her brain to comprehend what he had just said. Excuse me? I said, you need to take a damn cue. That made slightly more sense. She must have misheard. A cue from what? Your own style? Figure it out. Can you help me to the teacher's lounge now? Don't want to fall and embarrass myself in front of the brats. As weird as the man was, his last wish was at least understandable. Tarnishing your image in front of an audience was never fun. Walking side by side, they made their way over to the door only to be immediately blocked by a heatedly glaring mob of students. Most of their scorn was directed at Bakugo unsurprisingly. Huffing in annoyance, she stepped in the middle between the two sides to de-escalate the situation before someone resorted to actual violence. What is this commotion about? These extras want to scare us like the pathetic losers they are. Declaration of war? Don't make me laugh. Out of fairness, she should ask for the perspective of the other side as well. Bakugo was hardly an objective source. In front of the crowd stood a purple-haired kid with an almost bored expression. He seemed to be in charge, so Tanya addressed him. Could you tell me please what is going on here? I was just advising the hero course that they should be prepared to give it their all next week. Because if they don't, there are many people here who did not pass the biased entrance exam and they are more than ready to take their place. What is your name? Shinso. Shinso Hitoshi. From 1C. He stated defiantly. Petty rivalry? How amusing. Time to crush his misguided jealousy. How many points did you get during the entrance exam then, Shinso? 0. The test was not fair. It was heavily favoring those with physical and flashy quirks. Those with less destructive powers were left behind in the dust. You wouldn't understand that. Ignoring the whispered barb at the end, she followed up, oh? You got absolutely 0 points because of your non-flashy quirk? Yes. The exam was deeply unfair. How do you explain then how Hagakure here got in? She pointed at the pile of floating clothes to her right. I cannot fathom how only being invisible could help directly in taking down giant robots. You would additionally need to be athletic, fast, and smart to succeed. Or take Koda here, who can speak to animals. How do you imagine talking with birds and bees helped him in the entrance exam? The previously confident boy appeared to lose his previous bravado with every word she spoke. Exactly. The truth is that you could have made it in somehow if you had just found a way. There is more to fighting than your quirk. I honestly don't know how the evaluation works at UA, but even I can see that it measures more than brute strength alone. She turned to the rather nervous-looking green-haired boy to her left. Midoriya, you only learned to control your quirk not too long ago. How many points did you get? Z0 combat points and 60 rescue points? They had rescue points? Tanya asked, mildly surprised. With a raised eyebrow, she stared straight at Shinso, looking so thoroughly unimpressed that a few children at the sidelines began to snicker. Am I right to assume that helping other examinees was what granted you your score, Midoriya? She asked, not breaking eye contact with the Gen Ed student. Why, good to know. Now that we cleared that up, please go back to your classrooms or to the cafeteria. Blocking the corridor is unacceptable. Obviously not all fighting spirit had left Shinso, because his face twisted in fury and he yelled, that still doesn't mean that we don't deserve to be in the hero course. I'll show you by entering through the sports festival. Tanya regarded him with an encouraging nod and made her way through the dispersing mass of bodies towards the teacher's lounge. Hopefully Midnight hadn't broken the coffee machine again. For all her talent with the needle, that woman was as clumsy with electronics as a villain with snapped hamstrings. ##. Nemuri had in fact not broken the coffee machine. The settings were glitching out randomly and the brew it produced was a little thicker and spicier than normal, but she did not really mind. When she heard the door creak, she innocently sipped at her cup and sifted through her papers as if nothing was wrong. Nobody needed to know that she had. Not again, Nemuri, groaned Snipe as he uselessly pressed the start button over and over again. Damn it. How did he know? Why do you always suspect me? I haven't done anything. I was just sitting here and dash. Yeah, spare me the details. You owe me, Nemuri. You owe me for this injustice. Oh no, that was bad. She didn't want to fund his karaoke night again. Well, they were actually pretty fun, but the sharpshooting hero could drink like few others and good booze was quite expensive nowadays. That would cut harshly into her savings and she wanted to rather spend that money on the awesome new whip. She found. Think, Nemuri, think. When in doubt, use your body as a distraction. That was a tried and tested Midnight specialty. Oh, what do you want to do with me? She mock-shivered, pretending to shield her modesty with her hands, which only served to accentuate her curvy figure even more. Stop that. You ain't getting me with that OL trick. She pouted, clasping her hands and pushing her bosom out in a seductive yet innocent manner. You are no fun. Don't you want to do some naughty things to a young maiden like me, you strapping fellow? You are no young lady anymore. While that comment went too far. He would taste her wrath for this unfairly accurate insult. How dare you? I look not a day over 22. Take this. The R-rated heroine threw her half-empty cup at the fiend that had disrespected her beauty. Snipe expertly dodged the object with the ease of a veteran hero, and so it continued unhindered on its trajectory towards the entrance area. She could only watch in horror as in precisely that moment the door swung open again and the projectile hit another target. The porcelain burst and showered the entering person with coffee. Wait, was that Shoyuta? Oh, I'm so sorry, Shoyuta. Hastily, she jumped out of her seat and began her best to clean his plaster casts and bandages with a napkin. Not that it did much, but further smearing the pristine white cloth with brown. Enough, snapped her friend, and she fiddled with the stained handkerchief in shame. Her friend was in the process of recovering from severe wounds, and what did she do? Throw a mug at him. Sorry. It's wonderful to see you so well already. But, should you be out of the hospital? I mean, the rat would have notified us if they released you. Who knows? Maybe he thought it would be funnier that way. Alright, that sounds like him. Also, I released myself. Another day looking at a white ceiling and I think I would have gone insane. Nemuri chuckled at that. Yeah. Somehow I knew you would try that. Can't leave your kids alone for 2 weeks, why? You are such a sweetheart. Whatever. I trust my replacement has been adequate? Shoyuta, she's standing right there. Argent appeared to realize the awkwardness in the air and pointed at the coffee machine. It's okay. I was just going to dash. Snipe despondently shook his head and the number 11 heroine glanced at Midnight with unbridled contempt. Oh shit. ##. Nedu had sunken deep in thought. His eyes were fixed to the live feed on his screen and his paws were absent-mindedly tapping on the surface of his office desk. Normally, even the most complicated problem could be solved by him within a few minutes, but the scenario at hand was consuming his whole focus for more than an hour already. The enigma in question was no other than his dear employee Aizawa Shoyuta. When his familiar face had shown up on the security feed after entering the front gate, Nedu had been amused. The stubborn man seemed to never prioritize his own health above what he perceived as necessary for the well-being of his students. An admirable trait that led to much foolishness. Then his amusement switched to confusion when he saw Aizawa apparently flirting with Ms. Degurchaf. Was it a technique to catch her off guard or disorient her? Had the trauma to his head perhaps produced undiagnosed side effects? Was he on drugs? For his safety, Nedu needed to understand what precisely was happening to his former student. So he examined the video and audio footage closer and found more strange irregularities. They were subtle and could all individually be explained away, but they formed a pattern that was too consistent to ignore. For example, Aizawa spared his students not a single look. It was like they were of no importance to him at all. Or when he ate a peppermint bonbon which he normally hated. The only logical conclusion was that this was not really the pro-hero Eraserhead. An imposter had taken his place to infiltrate UA. Of course there was a direct way to prove this, but if he went down there and arrested the doppelganger on the spot, then that would only alert whoever was behind this operation. He had a few candidates for that in mind. Mainly the League of Villains or the Hero Public Safety Commission. Last time an outside force had penetrated the school security, it had ended in the USJ Attack, one of the most humiliating moments of his career. It had shown him that he had become far too lax and arrogant. Nedu vowed that such an event would never come to pass again as long as he drew breath. So investigating this suspicious individual was his highest priority at the time. First he checked all traffic cameras in a 5-kilometer radius to ascertain where the Aizawa lookalike had come from. Despite them using more hidden passageways and other less frequented routes, it took his facial recognition software only half an hour to pinpoint their exact way through the city. What he found was either the most disturbing fact that he learned today or the one that could put his worries entirely at ease. They came from the hospital. Maybe it had been the real Aizawa from the beginning? Or, something terrible had happened to the poor man. Visions of a villain skinning his employee alive and wearing his skin or forcefully taking over his body assaulted Nedu with gut-wrenching dread. As fast as his paws could manage, he dialed the number of the clinic, but was put directly into a waiting loop. That was bad. This much planning and competence was the work of an experienced team. Far too professional to come from the League of Villains, who only recently had made their clumsy debut. Not to get him wrong, Nedu was extremely grateful that they did not kill anybody during their assault on the USJ, but it also demonstrated a certain level of incompetence on their part. Armed with hundreds of criminals, a biological superweapon, and an incredible warping quirk, they could have staged a slaughter if their plan had been any good. I should be going now. The doctors are certainly searching for me all over the place like headless chickens, spoke Fake Shuda through the speaker of his computer. You know I missed you? Without you grumbling in my ear, I've felt lonely all week, whined Nemuri. Only 1 week? I have been gone for 2 in case you haven't noticed. Midnight punched the pretender slightly on the arm. Hush you. Will you show up to the sports festival? Of course. You can count on it. Wow, you sure sound enthusiastic about it, Shoyuda. Never thought you had it in you. How am I going to get in, by the way? The same as every year, silly. With your ID pass. Doesn't that sound a bit insecure? What if someone steals my pass or replicates it? Don't tell me that I am paranoid, Nemuri. After recent events, we cannot be too cautious. The previously jovial heroine sobered up and nodded seriously. Yes, you are right. The rat installed a ton of new security measurements for this reason. And what are they? I don't know if I feel comfortable with blindly trusting the security this time. That is not dash, she began, but stopped herself when she looked down at his bandages. Of course. Nedu would need to have a stern talk with Midnight when this was over. To give out sensitive information so readily was more than foolish, but in this special case he would not stop her. This failure would become unforgettable for her, he was going to make sure of that. Furthermore, if he knew which security details were given to the intruder, then he would be the one in control. Should the breach become too severe, he could still change the configuration of the safety protocols and special codes on a caprice. By luring the attacking party into a false sense of confidence, The principal would be able to play them however he wanted and lure them into a trap. Then he could also observe how they acted when believing themselves to be alone and safe, which was objectively the best way to catalog human behavior. Putting a tracker on their spy could possibly alert them, and they would increase their efforts of staying hidden, which would make it harder to roll out his retribution. No, he would do nothing for now, merely watch from afar. But their transgressions would not remain unpunished for long. As soon as they crawled out of their holes, the principal of UA would obliterate them. Their fruitless attempt was going to show the whole world that nobody messed with his school without painful consequences. Destroying their plans would be most satisfactory. His shrill laughter reverberated through the building, filling students and teachers alike with trepidation. Look at this lovely picture from glass on space battles. Fan art. Isn't it lovely? Pling. The sound of a knife being parried away uncomfortably broke the silence of a seemingly peaceful home life. Tanya had just been standing at the stove, stirring a pot full of noodles when she had intuitively thrown the kitchen knife on the counter at the shadows behind her. Any question as to who her assailant was went out the window as soon as a familiar pair of arms wrapped around her waist and Himiko's voice giggled into her ear. Too slow. In all fairness, the only person who knows the layout of my photoelectric barriers is you. I was more occupied with cooking than being alert. And here I thought the 11th goddess was losing her touch. Stop that. You know how much I hate that pretentious nickname. It's fitting though. You look absolutely stunning when you go around saving people. Of course they are going to give grand titles like that to you. Please. Gods and goddesses are useless concepts made to distract humans from the grim reality of their day-to-day lives. They do nothing besides looking pretty and wasting people's time with their worship. Isn't that what pro-heroes do? Actually, since when did you get so smart, Himiko? She asked with a bit of mirth in her voice. I learned from the best, senpai, cheered the smiling girl. So, do you have anything noteworthy to talk about? Inquired Tanya with a subtle squeeze of her partner's hand to signify that she was talking about whatever classified mission Himiko had undergone in the last few days. She had been meticulous to search her new apartment for bugs or hidden cameras, but it was impossible to tell if the HPSC might be listening in. Regardless of how many times the higher-ups had promised her that they respected her privacy, Tanya did not believe them. Politicians and government agents were all cut from the same slimy, rotten piece of cloth. Not particularly. Everything is as peaceful as ever. 2 squeezes back indicated that Himiko could not tell her the whole truth or risk punishment by the HPSC. Neither of them wanted that to happen, even if most of their negative reinforcement techniques were milder than what Tanya had dished out in her previous life. Just infiltrating the league and all that stuff. Anything interesting going on at school? I'm rapidly approaching the end of my contracted time as a teacher. Today, the one I was substituting for visited the school, so I guess he will be able to take over my class again soon. My class? You've grown attached to the brats already? Don't call them brats. You are barely older than those students. Himiko pouted. I am a grown woman like you. I am not a kid. Yeah. Talk to me about that again when you are old enough to drink. Not fair, senpai. Your own birthday is still a week away, so technically you are barely of age yourself. But I am not a teenager anymore. I don't want you to see me as a child. I want to be a woman for you. An understandable desire. Himiko wanted to be respected by her superior. If she was in her Kohai's position, Tanya would strive for the same. How else would she ever earn a promotion? For someone who had killed dozens and was tortured on multiple occasions, mental maturity was a given. To be called a kid was an insult to Himiko's many achievements as a person. I am sorry. I did not intend to underplay your progress. You are my valued colleague and, dare I say, closest friend. Despite the negligent difference in physical age between you and my students, your mind has evolved far further than any of them. Strangely, Himiko did not seem happy about that. Should she have emphasized her outstanding work ethic more? Or had she perhaps misunderstood and Himiko was also insecure about her body or something ridiculous like that? You are also exceedingly pretty if that is what you are concerned with. If you could show your face openly in public, then you would be overrun with suitors, I bet. Tanya had no idea what the more feminine members of her gender were concerned with, but romance always appeared to be an important topic for young adolescents. The few movies and novels she had consumed were her only source in that regard. Sadly, she had apparently missed the mark again if Himiko's sour expression was anything to go by. "Why won't you notice, senpai?" Quickly changing the subject of the discussion before it could become too awkward, she turned to Himiko before asking, "Inch? Want some noodles?" "All right," answered Himiko despondently. What would cheer her up? More ice cream? No, that trick was getting old. A higher salary? Also no. The higher-ups kept a tight financial leash on both of them. Running out of options, she chose the cheapest one. Hopefully it would be enough. "We can spend tomorrow together if that doesn't interfere with your orders. I am not on patrol this weekend." It was remarkable just how fast her partner's mood could switch. In spite of experiencing the process of growing up 3 times, Tanya suspected that she would never comprehend how people of this age group actually functioned. With a wide smile, the young vampire exclaimed, "Yay! Let's go to the cinema. They are running this super cute rom-com at the moment that sounds perfect for us. I guess our lives are like a comedy sometimes," Tanya mused. Why was Himiko looking at her like she had said something idiotic? ##. The day of the sports festival was here. Powerloader had really earned himself an extra vacation with all the overtime he was putting into expanding the security. Nedu was positive that an attack of some sort was coming and he would not be surprised by it this time. He had shared some of his concerns with the faculty and the heroes stationed around the stadium, but he had kept the finer details to himself. It could tip the villains off if they noticed them acting differently or worse, giving away information through word of mouth. There was also the dilemma with a potential spy being already planted inside his school. While he possessed no evidence and was generally against accusing anybody in particular, Degurchaf was the most likely candidate for that job. However, so far she showed exceptional commitment in educating her students, and her affiliation with the HPSC ruled out a life of secret villainy. If Nedu had not visited Aizawa himself in the hospital, then he would be at the top of his suspect list too. Thankfully, the man had been honest when he described the awful migraine and mysterious memory loss he experienced yesterday. Judging by the bump on his head, someone had knocked him out none too gently with a blunt object. Luckily, it wasn't a concussion that would slow down his recovery process. No, as loath as he was to admit it, if there was a traitor among them, then it was probably a student. Another reason to carefully observe the festival and scour the footage later for the slightest hint of collaboration with the enemy that was certain to reveal itself. No matter how the day went, it was sure to be memorable. ##. Ochako was trembling in her boots for multiple reasons. First and foremost, because she was afraid to embarrass herself on national TV and in front of her family. But also because she was so damn excited. She had already felt like the happiest girl in Japan when her acceptance letter came in the mail. It was like a dream come true. Or a nightmare, some might argue. The entrance exam had been her first brush with death, as the zero-pointer nearly flattened her, and then she was attacked by real, actual, living and breathing villains too? Madness. Both times she was scared, afraid and helpless against obstacles threatening to utterly crush her. Despite how recent those situations were to her, those memories shaped her. Ochako did not want to be just some damsel in distress. She wanted to be strong like her friends and idols. Subsequently, she trained her butt off in the last weeks and was itching to see how much progress she had made. The sports festival was as much a test from the school to evaluate the students, as it was a test for herself to evaluate her own growth. Suddenly, the speakers in the corner of the waiting room blared to life. Hello and welcome to the annual UA Sports Festival, dear listeners. I am your host for today, Present Mike, and as a very special guest here in my studio, I am thrilled to introduce to y'all, drumroll please, the number 11 heroine and temporary substitute teacher, Argent. Say something to your fans. Greetings. It's a pleasure to be here on this fine morning. Thank you for having me, Present. I am looking forward to what the kids are going to show the world today. Dear listeners, are you also as excited as us to see the up-and-coming hits of tomorrow make their big entrance today? Deafening cheering permeated even through the gate to the stadium. Wonderful! Wonderful! Then let the festival commence. First we have the shining star of our school, the class that has drawn everybody's attention after their run-in with some real villains 2 weeks ago. Give it up to Class 1A. If possible, the cheering got louder as they stepped out into the blinding light of the sun mixed with thousands of flashing cameras. It took everything she had not to duck and hide her face from the raving crowd. And next we have the other heroics class of UA. 1B has much to prove, and I wager that some of them are going to surprise us with how hard they're gonna fight for the spotlight. Ochako tuned the rest of the introductions out, in favor of subtly warming her muscles up and stretching her arms and legs to be in top condition for whatever the teachers were going to throw at them. At the end of the festival, nobody was going to say that she didn't give her absolute best. Nobody would. She was ripped out of her personal motivation speech by Bakugo tapping the microphone on stage. Why was he speaking at the microphone again? If you want to compete here, I have one thing to say to you. Oh no. Ochako had a bad feeling about this. I'm gonna win. But you extras better give it your damn best, scrambling for second place. 'Cause it's more fun that way, he grinned darkly. Angry booing erupted among her fellow students, and she was inclined to chime in. What a rude thing to say. Did he have no shame to mock the whole school like that? On the other hand though, she could admire his drive, his will to stand at the very top, and his confidence in achieving that goal. Had she not tried to think about herself similarly less than a minute ago? Although Bakugo's way of saying it was more than questionable, he had successfully inspired everybody who wanted to prove him wrong. They all would be giving it their best just to stick it to the arrogant kid who was now leaving the stage. Ms. Midnight was hyping up the crowd again. What a fiery speech from our student representative. Things are only going to get more stimulating when we see which game will get chosen for the first round of this girthy festival. Gird your loins, contestants, for you will be participating in. The R-rated heroine dramatically waved her whip at the spinning wheel, which was supposed to randomly determine the next event. Ochako wondered in passing if it wouldn't get tiring to constantly come up with different innuendos. The obstacle course. Fantastic. Over and over her teacher had hammered into them that mobility was key, and she had a quirk perfectly suited for that. If only she could use her new support gear, then it would be even better. ##. Isuku gulped, feeling his heart pounding in his chest as they stood in front of the large tunnel, mere seconds away from charging into the fray. He tried to concentrate on his breathing exercises like Hound Dog had told him, but it turned into a hiccup as he heard Bakugo's palms pop and fizzle somewhere nearby. He could not see the other boy, but he had been threatened by these particular fireworks too many times not to recognize either the sound or sweet-smelling smoke instantly at this point. Kaken was not threatening him though, just bleeding off the nervous energy they were all feeling as they awaited the crack of Midnight's whip and the declaration to start. Trying again, he closed his eyes and breathed deep, focusing his attention inwards, starting from his toes and working his way up. Like a systems check, he went over each joint and muscle, tapping thumb to finger one at a time and rolling his neck. He needed to be limber. Ms. de Gurchaf made clear that remaining loose was always important in avoiding injuries, and that went doubly for him. If you're going to toss yourself around like that with your quirk, you do well to make sure you know how to take a fall without getting hurt, he remembered her saying, as well as the hours of internet videos he watched after about how gymnast tumblers hit the ground safely. Shaking out his wrists and rolling his neck, he opened his eyes just in time for Midnight to give them the signal, and then they were off. Or, more accurately, many of his competitors were, yet he remained still, crouching low and observing the screaming and pushing crowd ahead. It's admirable, running into the fire without hesitation. Very heroic. I'm sure you've all heard such notions romanticized before. I, for one, find it the height of foolishness. Are there times when a moment cannot be spared and action is needed immediately? Certainly, though it is less common than you might believe. Not every incident is a crisis. It takes years of experience before your instincts are honed well enough to rely on impulsive speed, and until then, rushing in will rarely result in the best possible outcome. Recognize when there is time to think and utilize it accordingly. Analyze, plan, and competently execute, and you will find success always within reach. The crowd that had rushed ahead of him were now jammed at the entrance of the tunnel, wedged in and preventing each other from passing through the narrow opening. Ochako, having been one of the other students who held back, no doubt recalling their teacher's words as well, got a running start and jumped before bringing her fingers together to send herself soaring over the crowd. Shiro also had the same idea to go up and over, along with Bakugu propelling himself above their fellow students. With a firm grasp of the situation, Isuku prepared to do the same, green lightning dancing across his body as ice engulfed everything in an instant. Isuku blinked at the tundra in front of him, but quickly shook his head, regaining focus and thanking his teacher's advice for preventing him from getting caught up in Todoroki's enthusiasm. Instead, he leapt with the barest minimum of one for all circulating through his muscles, catapulting his body over the majority of the group whose feet were still frozen to the ground. Sorry, he yelled back as he used the head of a hapless student as a stepping stone. He didn't look back when he hit the ground, instead converting his momentum into a roll that disoriented him briefly, but conserved his speed. The fewer times he would have to use his quirk, the smaller was the risk of him injuring himself, so he needed to make the most out of his superpowered jump. Even if he was confident that he would not completely shatter his bones anymore, Isuku instinctively knew that he hadn't mastered one for all enough to use while running, so instead he relied on old-fashioned sprinting to quickly surpass the Gen Ed students who were ahead of him. He really did need to talk with all might about how he managed to stay stuck to the ground when running at high velocity without accidentally launching himself into the stratosphere. Isuku was proud to see that he was already pulling ahead of the mob. He could even spot Kaken's explosions in front of him. Eyes narrowed in focus, the green-haired boy decided that the risk was worth it and began to occasionally incorporate more 3 or 5% powered leaps into his run, making the distance between him and the frontrunners shrink rapidly. That was until the giant zero-pointers reared their blocky heads and he nearly sprained an ankle by messing up one of his landings. They expected them to fight those things during a race. The memory of the entrance exam caused phantom pain to bloom in his arm and legs, and he clenched his jaw. He doesn't need to fight, just get past them. Discretion is the better part of valor. Perhaps it seems strange to you here in the heroics class, but it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes, if a fight can be avoided, you should do so. Stomping with a flicker of his quirk to embed his shoe into the dirt, he formed a rudimentary starting block to brace his foot against and bent his knee to let himself fall forward. Izuku felt his side chilled as he throttled all for one and kicked off, sending up an explosion of dirt and causing someone behind him to enter a coughing fit and passing Todoroki just as he readied some large ice attack. However, while the zero-pointers and everyone else was focused on them, Izuku had already gotten past the Cyclopean robots and was well on his way to the next obstacle. He would do it. He was going to show everyone, All Might and even Ms. de Gurchaff that he was here. ##. Toru was shivering badly. Her thin school uniform was doing nothing to alleviate the searing coldness spreading throughout her body. The pain would have been manageable if she had not already been hurting all over from the countless bruises she earned while fighting her way out of the crowd at the start. Nervous, competitive people tended to be brutal when clawing for a position at the top. A fact she was made even more keenly aware of due to being invisible and eating more than one stray elbow to the face. Nonetheless, she did make it out of the flailing pile of screaming and shoving students. Somehow, she might have to become religious for miracles like that to happen more frequently to her. Toru knew that without a physical quirk her chances of doing well in this event were relatively low, but the true reality of how hopelessly outmatched she was presented itself when she found her way blocked by frozen and destroyed zero-pointers. Sometimes life was simply unfair. Well, it also wouldn't be fun if it was too easy. So she bit back a curse as she climbed with her bare hands over the icy and sharp-edged barricade and slid down the other side. Most of the smaller robots that had been spared were confused by her seemingly empty school uniform, and she remembered the spots where each of their different kill switches were located from the entrance exam, which made dispatching any she could not avoid child's play. Just as Toru came into viewing distance of the next obstacle, a pit with ropes over it, Present Mike announced that the frontrunners were reaching the one after that. At least she now knew that a minefield of some kind was waiting for her. Class 1A seems to be in the lead. With powerhouses like Todoroki, Bakugu and Midoriya, will the others even stand a chance to win this race? commented the voice hero from his studio. Normally I would say yes, but attacking other students was explicitly prohibited, so I am not too sure. Oh, who would you have picked as a promising candidate if that was the case, Argent? The pink-haired girl from the support course dash. Hatsune. Yes, Hatsune. I guarantee you that some of her equipment could be used for long-distance capture. Like that grapple hook she used earlier. Quirks are powerful on their own, but technology can be just as versatile. Well folks, you heard it here first. The number 11 is a support item enthusiast. What might be her hidden gadget that she kept a secret for so long? I never said dash. Oh look, Midoriya is digging up the mines. What could he want with them? Genius or madman? We will soon find out. Ignoring their banter, Toru feverishly checked the other participants to figure out the fastest way over the ropes. Tsu caught her eye as she was speedily crawling along the ropes hanging over the chasm thanks to her extraordinary grip strength. Maybe Toru could replicate that. She tried to not look into the abyss below her as she hung herself on the nearest rope upside down. Her legs were crossed over each other as she bobbed along the swinging cable towards the other side. Left unoccupied by the exhausting but repetitive task, Toru started to listen to the broadcasted commentary again. Ugh. Dear listeners, can you believe it? Midoriya just used the mines as a cushion to soften his fall after jumping nearly 50 meters into the air, securing him the first place by a split second. What a maneuver! Indeed. It was impressive that he was able to think of his own safety instead of just jumping without planning for the impact. Although I would urge everybody who is watching right now to never attempt a similar trick. The margin for error is so small that you would risk life-threatening injuries without a shock absorption quirk. Midoriya is lucky to have multiple capable pro heroes on standby who could have surely intervened if his borderline suicidal plan went wrong. Stay safe, kiddos. We're pros and we know what we're doing. Anyways, Todoroki has used his ice to skate over the field and Bakugo flew over it entirely. Directly behind them, we have Shigaraki from One coming in unexpectedly and Ida. As Present Mike droned on and on about who was making it to the finish line, Toru grew increasingly nervous. Time was running out if she wanted to make it to the next round. Her palms were raw from all the abuse she was putting them through, but she nonetheless continued to climb until she reached the other side of the pit, instantly falling into a sprint despite her aching lungs. Due to the minefield being largely cleared of actual obstacles by now, she skidded into the 30th place without much trouble. Too bad that no one would pay attention to her on TV when she reached the finish line. Once again Toru wished that her quirk could be turned off at will. She was not a vain person, but she wanted people to at least know that she existed. Or if that was too much to ask, even remembering her own eye color would be nice. Getting forgotten by everyone around you sometimes sounded worse than death to her. Wiping an invisible tear from her cheek, she approached her classmates to feel a little bit more real again. Hashtag. Shigaraki was rubbing his hands in anticipation of the upcoming raid, disintegrating the smartphone between his fingers in the process. His rogue had collected valuable info about the dungeon and now he held the key to defeating the boss in his. He could almost feel it. Victory was in reach. He would need to buy her some cosmetics later to keep her morale up. Useful NPCs like her were hard to come by and didn't want to re-roll for a new character with possibly shitty stats again. Even with Sensei's vast resources, such pay-to-win tactics could get too expensive really quick. Shigaraki had planned the whole mission out meticulously, so nothing would go wrong if his team members could follow his instructions properly. Else Kurogiri was going to teleport a few hundred kilos more dust into the ocean. The seasonal UA Sports Festival event always consisted of 3 phases. All 3 challenges were designed to keep the trash mobs busy while the guards patrolled around the arena periodically. His clever plan intended to strike them when their attention would be lowest to cause as much chaos and confusion as possible. Therefore, the period after the start of the second phase would be most ideal moment of attack, because even the heroes, bored from the uneventfulness of the first, were going to watch what the stupid NPCs were doing. Then he, destroyer of peace and provider of truth, would destroy the fragile thing that they called safety. Nobody in this world was safe, because the heroes could not protect them. He would show them. Shigaraki would show them all. Haha. I'll tear this rotten society down. Now,